Welcome to the third hearing of the Committee's inquiry into public toilets. I acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians on the lands on which we're meeting today. I pay my respects to elders past and present and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of New South Wales. I also acknowledge and pay my respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. My name's Dr. Amanda Conn and I'm Chair of the inquiry. I ask everyone in the room to please turn their mobile phones to silent. Parliamentary privilege applies to witnesses in relation to the evidence they give today. However, it does not apply to what witnesses say outside of the hearing. I urge witnesses to be careful about making comments to the media or to others after completing their evidence. In addition, the Legislative Council has adopted rules to provide procedural fairness for inquiry participants. I encourage committee members and witnesses to be mindful of these procedures. Welcome, and thank you all so much for making the time to give evidence today. Could each witness, starting from my left, state your name and position and then swear either the oath or the affirmation?
My name is Tina Kodrastami. I am the Director of MHA Design. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Fiona Davies, I'm appearing in my personal capacity and I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
My name is Matthew Hayes. I'm a hidden disability advocate. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Would any of you like to start by making a short opening statement? Go ahead.
I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and their elders past, present and future. I pay my respects to them and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. As the Director of MHA Design, it is a firm that develops designs according to the needs of the neurodiverse community. I'm here today to provide some information, especially over four main areas: inclusive bathroom design, spatial design in social settings, going beyond sensory needs, and of course the understanding of inclusivity to be a right, not a privilege. Around 20% of our population is neurodiverse, and yet public access is limited to most. This can be because of our legislations and how they do not consider the extent of cognitive, sensory, and social variation present in our communities. Segregation and isolation are symptoms of a very unsupportive environment, which disregards any consideration shown towards the importance of engagement by all. So MHA proposes a few fundamental points for inclusive design, that being there is no universal level of comfort appropriate for everyone, and so it is preferred for a default low stimuli standard to be presented towards any setting. Allowing for people to make informed decisions is empowering and builds on confidence, and this can be done through the provision of signs and information boards strategically distributed in public and readily made available online, but also providing transition and breakout spaces as often as possible so that ND individuals can help regulate themselves when feeling overwhelmed. Also, co-developing standards with families and caretakers will ensure a wide range of needs are met as promptly as possible. Most importantly, participants themselves must have more opportunity presented to them for contribution in design and planning matters.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to appear today. Particularly thank you to Dr. Conn for her support of this inquiry. I'm delighted to have the chance to give evidence at this inquiry. My name's Fiona Davies. In my day job, I'm the CEO of the Australian Medical Association in New South Wales. However, I've come here today because of my personal passion, which is a complete obsession with public toilets. At any given time, I know where every available toilet is in every location I am. I know where there will be queues. I know which ones might be out of service, and I know which public toilets you can get into if you are in a hurry. This rather unusual interest comes from my most important job, which is being a parent to a wonderful 15-year-old who lives with level 3 autism. She combines her level 3 autism with being the world's most social and outgoing human being, which means we spend a lot of time worrying about and looking at public toilets in public spaces. We are incredibly fortunate as a family with our experience of autism, in that Matilda is toilet trained, but that means that she has a functional level of about a 4 or 5 year old. And that comes with the various disruptions that can come with having an urgent need to find a toilet. And if you've ever cleaned up the mess from a 4 or 5-year-old who's had an accident, you can envision what it is like when a 15-year-old has a poo explosion on a Saturday night in the middle of the city. And that's an experience we've had as a family more than once. For every one of those experiences, we've had an arm-busting crisis with an urgent need to find a toilet, and the jiggling while holding it in line in a toilet. The reason I'm here is because for all of our challenges, our family experiences disability with incredible privilege. We have the confidence and the means to access public facilities if we wish to, and I am so mindful that for so many families, they possibly live in parts of Sydney where that is just not an option, or that they would not feel safe or comfortable to go into many of the spaces that my family can go into. And so improving access for public toilets is not just going to help people with disability. There's a really important principle in public health. It's called the curb cut principle. And it talks about the fact that if you improve access to something for one group, you actually end up extending the benefit to a range of different groups. I'm not an expert in this area, but I am an expert in advocacy. I deal with big advocacy issues, and I know one of the most important things in advocacy is actually what gets time and attention. And I just wanted to mainly come and thank this committee for giving this issue time and attention, because it's not an easy issue to give time and attention to, but actually it is something where with your time and attention, you could make an enormous difference in the lives of people. And I say that as a person whose other job involves, getting you to part with billions of dollars of money for health services. This is something where you could make such an enormous difference, and I would really encourage you to do so. On my small wish list, what we love about public toilets is predictability. So there's been some fantastic developments. We are fortunate we live in the northern suburbs of Sydney. So toilets that you know are going to be near train stations or metro stations, toilets that are open extended hours. I'd love to see the City of Sydney do more to encourage businesses to keep their toilets open and make them easily accessible. And ideally to raise some awareness about the fact that when you've got a jiggling, anxious 15-year-old standing next to you in a queue, you might want to let them go in first because you're about to see an accident. So there are really simple and small changes that I think we could make and you could make here, and I'm just so grateful to have the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much to the committee for giving me this opportunity to talk here today. My name is Matthew Hayes. I'm 18. I'm best known for my work as the Youth Deputy Premier of New South Wales in Youth Parliament last year, serving in Coringa's Youth Advisory Committee, its Young Citizen of the Year, and also my work on the channel Ahead Matthew Awesome, which has a combined 4,000 followers on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, where I talk about transport, politics, and disability advocacy. But outside of that, I live with a hidden disability. When I was first diagnosed with autism when I was 2 years old, the prognosis was that I wouldn't be able to talk, have a conversation, and never in a million years be a witness to a Legislative Council inquiry speaking on behalf of my community. So it is a huge honour and privilege to be able to talk to you all today. Most of my family and friends also live with a disability, and having accessible public facilities is crucial to allow a person with a disability to be able to access community services and interact with their community, and this includes public restrooms. Public restrooms are not always a popular topic, as it's an essential but private activity in a public place, so often detailed conversations about safety, accessibility and comfortability is ignored because the topic can be taboo by the general public. So it's great that this inquiry has been going into it's been great that this inquiry has been going so in depth about this topic, which is vital to people's independent living. In my written submission, I mentioned how the traditional communal style toilets, sharing facilities with other people at the same time, can often be overwhelming for neurodivergent people with its loud noises from hand dryers and sinks, its smells and flickering lights. And this can deter people from visiting places where these facilities are in place if they've had a bad experience in the past. There are also other difficulties for people with physical disabilities, those who are non-binary, and those with PTSD using traditional communal toilets. The best layout, in my opinion, for this, in my own experience, is having separate individual compartments, each with their own toilet and sink. A great example of this, which I mentioned in my written submission, is how the restrooms were designed in the Sydney Metro City and Southwest project. The layout of them includes 6 separate bathrooms each, 2 male, 2 female, 1 male ambulant, 1 female ambulant, 1 unisex, and 1 unisex wheelchair accessible bathroom. But even with this layout, there are improvements that could be made. For those with more significant to profound disabilities, it's important for them and their carers to have changing places, with a changing table that can support an adult person, have a hoist, etc. Except in brand new shopping centres and stadiums, these are still quite rare in the community, and without these facilities, it can be significantly difficult for people with severe to profound disabilities and their carers to access community services. I would like to see these changing places more available in the community. Before I conclude, I wish to also mention that for a lot of people with hidden disabilities who require to use disability toilets when there are no other choice other than a traditional communal toilet, there can be a lot of aggression by people of the general public. It would be great to get awareness to the community that not every disability is visible, and you can't always see the reason why people need to use a disability toilet. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you all so much, and we're very grateful for the very different types of expertise you're bringing to the inquiry about hidden disabilities and neurodiversity. I might start off with design. Obviously, there's an issue as well with availability of toilets, and I'm sure we're going to come to that. But in terms of the design of toilets, Mr. Hayes, you've just gone into quite a lot of detail about your preferred design. So I might go to Ms. Kodustami first. I suppose, what are the overarching design principles that we should be looking at? What does best practice look like for accessible toilets in your view?
Yeah, absolutely. So in my opinion, we have 2 elements to look at. We've got the specific bathroom space itself and then the accessibility, the leading up to that space. So leading up to it, we need to have a lot more transitional spaces. And what I mean by this is areas where a person has the opportunity to prepare themselves for what's to come. This will help with the regulation of certain challenging behaviours that could be presented. It could help an individual prepare themselves for upcoming triggers, because no matter how specific we are about the design of a space, there will always be triggers present. And we need to allow individuals to build on their confidence by offering them a space of relief. This moment could look like, a hidden entry, or it could look like a breakout space that's strategically presented at right before you access the bathroom space. And this moment of relief allows for the person to understand where they're going, what's coming towards them, and for them to be able to understand if they're ready to enter that space themselves. So that also allows for a lot of capacity building to take place, a lot more. Working within the disability sector, I also work as an operation manager, and often I am presented with, the concern from various different stakeholders that, my son, my daughter, or my participant isn't excelling. They aren't reaching their goals, and this goes back to capacity building. So such transitional spaces, such breakout areas, positions right before you're entering a new space, it allows for that capacity building to take place, which of course then grows on a person's confidence and allows them to go into the community themselves independently. The actual bathroom space itself, Mr. Matthew Hayes, you did my job for me. We need a lot more options in place. The more options you have, the better it would be, of course. But what we often get presented when saying that is there are financial costs and limitations. So again, I would have to go back to speaking about adaptability and flexibility of our spaces. This is something that, often councils, local governments is a little bit more concerned with than other levels or scales of government. And what they often respond to when it comes to financial costs regarding bathroom spaces or other public areas is that the financial cost stops us from providing adaptability or flexibility within this space. what flexibility could look like is, the provision of areas which can be shaped and molded throughout time according to public participation and how those responses are provided, the feedback that's being provided. Having partitions that can move, or having various cubicles that can change in shape and what's provided within them. Initially it is a high cost. However, you will see a steep decline in maintenance cost, in costs associated with vandalism as well, because that can often be a challenging behaviour presented. And because of that increased integration within the community and participation within the community, you'll see that by having this initial cost up front, you're actually investing in your community's future, because you are promoting a lot more contribution from people that have a higher capacity, except that capacity isn't currently recognised or acknowledged because they don't have that ability to present that capacity. So going back to the design elements, the cubicles themselves, they need to be able to respond to community feedback. So over time, if it's understood that we need a certain type of cubicle, it shouldn't be a conversation that takes multiple years for that transformation to take place. It should be an easy change. And currently we have many different forms of hinges in place. We have many different types of toilets, basins, sinks, which can be easily moved around, can be easily reversed or flipped around. By using these elements that do cost a little bit more, we are making the future use of these spaces. Well, not the future use. We're making the proposals, the buildings timeline last longer. The buildings age. So it is an investment in the future. So I would say focusing on the space leading up to the bathroom itself, and making sure that the bathroom space is adaptable in design and layout.
Thank you. And I'll come to Ms. Davies as well, but in reference to Mr. Hayes' very specific recommendation around the sort of single cubicle design where you've got a wash basin or a mirror inside the toilet that then opens directly back onto a public space, rather than the sort of old style where you've got a private shared space and lots of cubicles. Is that your preferred design as well?
I would say we still need a combination of both, because again, everyone presents differently according to their traumas and their upbringing and the environments they have been presented to. We have trauma-based behaviours, and we can't just limit behaviours according to a diagnosis. So certain individuals want that independence, and they want that privacy for themselves, which would mean that such an option would be amazing for them. But there are other individuals that still need that support, that one-on-one guidance from the caretaker, and they would need access to such a space. I would also be mindful of anti-ligature elements as well, fixtures being used. At times when we are in closed spaces, that could be triggering itself. And
sorry, could you just explain?
Anti-ligature elements. So these are fixtures that we can use to make sure an individual can't harm themselves when in a closed space. So this can look like hooks that when a weight is placed on them, they flip back inside. We do need to be a little bit more mindful about what's presented within the bathrooms themselves, and making sure that a person can't harm themselves if they are left alone. Again, we want to promote independence, and that does mean doing things alone a lot more often. So we need to reduce the amount, the risk presented in these spaces as much as possible, without providing a sense of institutionalization as well. I've done this successfully in multiple different residential developments, and we have many case studies, I'd say about 10 now, where individuals who have been living in hospitals for decades, or they've been in various different institutions, they have now been living within these homes for about 9 to 10 months. And, you know, it's nothing fancy. It's just that the way that you design these homes, if they don't look like institutions, they actually look like homes. If the spaces are considerate of those transitional and breakout spaces, and if the fixtures and elements you use are anti-ligature, you're promoting a lot more confidence. And I think that's the key element here, ownership of space and independence as well.
Last question from me, and I'll go to other members of the committee. What other recommendations or sort of supports should we be looking at sort of specifically around this question of awareness of the so-called hidden disabilities? We had a very long discussion yesterday with people with experience of mobility impairment or physical disability, and we certainly have heard some evidence that only people who need accessible toilets should use accessible toilets. And there's obviously a broad range of people who need accessible toilets, and we don't always know why that is. What sorts of things do you think we should be looking at or recommending?
Yeah, I mean, there is a term called reverse inclusion. And, you know, this is something that I've started to talk a lot more as of recent, because everyone likes to put things into categories, and I understand that from a practical sense that it makes things a lot more easier, but we need to get out of this mentality of saying that this space is for neurodiverse individuals, this space is for the rest of the community, because there is no such thing as neurotypical. We really need to just look at spaces, especially shared communal spaces, as an environment which has to be inclusive. So regardless of a person's diagnosis, regardless of a person's upbringing or, you know, the traumas that they have faced in life, we need to be open to providing as many options as possible, because that's how you allow for inclusivity. For the neurodiverse community themselves, because they have constantly been put into this category of being different and not being preferred when it comes to not being prioritized when it comes to the design and layout of the spaces that we integrate within, they themselves tend to shy away. We need to have them participating, like today, in a lot more of these discussions. They are the experts when it comes to understanding inclusivity for ND individuals. You know, those of us who are caretakers, family members, you know, designers, professionals, we do our best to understand exactly what is required, but there is no one solution when it comes to inclusive space for neurodiverse individuals. It's about that overall understanding that we need to provide a lot more adaptability, a lot more options, and we need to move away from the thinking of neurotypical being at the norm, because it is non-existent, and it promotes reverse inclusion, which is having segregated spaces that are allocated to others. We can't, that shouldn't be the next solution. The next solution should be a space which integrates everyone and doesn't categorize people according to a diagnosis they may have.
Thank you. Interested in perspectives from the other witnesses on the same question as well.
Yeah, so can you repeat the question again, just very quickly?
It was about how we can support awareness and understanding of the so-called hidden disabilities and you know, sort of the broad range of diversity of people that need to use accessible bathrooms when they are available.
Yeah, absolutely. So you know, in my own experience, you know, I've had quite a few times when I've tried to access bathrooms, disability bathrooms. I've been subject to verbal abuse quite a few times by some members of the general public in the past. I think that it's important that, and I think it's just a general, general awareness over time that, as I mentioned a little bit in my opening statement, that not every disability is visible. You can't always see the reason why someone needs to use an accessible bathroom. And I know that for me in my own experience, it's a lot of like say if I go to like a shopping centre and stuff like that, often you'll get your standard communal toilets, male, female, and then you get the wheelchair accessible bathroom. Often the accessible bathroom, which quite a lot of places as well also mention it as a unisex bathroom as well. So it's unisex and wheelchair accessible bathroom as well. It's mentioned that most Sydney train stations that it's both as well. And often it's the only toilet that most neurodivergent people, if it's the only one available, that they feel comfortable and safe in, that's the one that they'll take. So that's sort of I think it's just a general making people aware that that not everybody who you can't always see the reason why someone needs to be able to use a wheelchair accessible bathroom, and just that general awareness I think would help out quite significantly.
Yeah, our family, we really love the Sunflower Project. We love seeing it here. My daughter doesn't wear her lanyard most of the time. She always wears it travelling, but she doesn't wear it most of the time. But for our family, it's a really lovely, inclusive symbol. It's something where you can go and start a conversation. And so some of those just really simple things and symbols that businesses or communities could use to actually say, this is a safe space to come, and a bit about just raising some awareness about why people have differing needs. That's been I just think it's such an inclusive, simple symbol, but it really does make a big difference, because you otherwise go through your entire life, wherever you are, being a bit different in that person. And just that knowledge that, particularly in relation to public spaces like toilets, some simple things about, maybe you could give your space up in the queue. You would be astonished at how uncommon it is that you will see an obviously distressed, and my daughter, you can tell that there's a level of disability, but that very rarely gets a reaction. But just some really simple messaging that reminded people disability access toilets are a resort we will use, but there's usually only one of them. They're ironically, because they're designed for physical disability, the doors take a really long time to close, which is very appropriate, but has been a factor for us a few times. It's better than nothing, but there are so few of them, and you are very conscious of taking somebody's space where they may otherwise not have any other option. But in terms of design, I think we would love everything. We would love more capacity with existing toilets, but that, yes, where there was the capacity for building new toilets, and we know this from hospitals, if you build it right to start, you save yourself a heap of money down the track. And so single-use cuticle and large cubicles are actually quite helpful for us. We thankfully no longer have to be in the cubicle with her, but until she was about 13, we did, and the only instance we've had with a really serious lost child incident, police called, etc., arose from a toilet in Barangaroo, where it was so small we couldn't both be in the toilet, and then the time it took me to go to the toilet and walk back outside, she'd wandered off and was picked up by a police car under the Harbour Bridge, happily walking off to get ice cream. So it's those really small. So if there's a possibility for toilets that are single cubicles in new builds, that has lots of benefits for lots of people. But we also recognise that's not the only answer. We do need to make sure that with the existing toilets, but some places are really fantastic with signage. So that's also really useful information about when toilets are going to be open and closed. Certainly with public toilets at train stations, shutting them off at 6 o'clock's terrible and really not inclusive. So, that's sort of open into the evening, and investing that money into cleaning and keeping them safe. If you know where they are, it's okay. It's when you get there and you discover that they're locked, or you can't get in, or you've got to find somebody, or there's barriers. Those are the things that would be really good to overcome, and really simple. I mean, those are not big complex things. It's just cleaning for a bit later. It's just having them checked and accessible for a bit longer.
Thank you. I might go to other members of the committee. Mr. Lawrence?
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for your submissions and your evidence and coming along, and we think it's a really important inquiry too, so we're glad that you do. Just on this question of disability access toilets, we've had a little bit of conflicting evidence on it. We had one fellow yesterday who referred to the fact that under the relevant building standard, once you provide a disability access toilet, that the requirement to provide standard toilets then significantly drops. And I think if I understood him correctly, he was suggesting that that is premised on the fact that everyone will be able to use the disability access toilet. So I'm just interested in teasing that out a bit with you, Ms Davies. Are you of the view that we should adhere to a system where, say for example, in commercial premises, that the disability access toilet should generally be reserved for people with a disability?
Yes, and that's a very small part of the solution. But if people can have other toilet stock that's not, that should not be the thing that gets you out of having to build more toilets.
Yeah, sure.
Basically. Yeah. And yes, we as a family, we really try not to particularly use the physical disability space, but I can actually, for men, or for other circumstances, but yes, the guidelines should not allow the provision of one disability toilet to be your I've ticked the toilet box, that's all I need to do box.
And is your reason for thinking that they should be reserved for those people, is that to do with sort of queuing, or is it to do with cleanliness, or is it to do with other factors in terms of how people who've got a disability would be disadvantaged if access was broader?
We try, just because I'm so aware that if you've got a physical disability, you may not have the other choice, but that's just a personal choice. But if we had to, we would use it.
Yeah.
But I think we just need to have more toilets of all kinds.
Yeah. That's
what I think we need to have. And that, disability toilets are just one small part of it. I would much prefer that we had for our type of disability. And I think it's been really great hearing Matthew's experience of male toilets, which I don't have much experience of, but I think there'd probably be other factors where that would actually be really confronting. But I think we need to expect building designs to have some disability toilets, which would be largely for people with this, but that the majority of, but a larger stock of general use toilets.
Yeah.
Ideally a bit more, well designed and supportive and comfortable for people to use.
And in terms of this issue of hidden disabilities and on the one hand encouraging the community to understand that lots of people are going to need to access these toilets, but on the other hand not wanting to broaden that out so much that it loses its sort of quality as a facility that's going to be timely and clean and so forth. I mean, there seems to me to be a tension there between, because it occurred to me on the one hand, maybe there should be a sign on disability toilets that informs the community that lots of disabilities are hidden, but that might then encourage anyone to use them, I suppose.
I think people are actually usually pretty good about it. What you do tend to find, though, is when the main toilets are overwhelmed and the queue's out the door, then all bets are off and everybody is using everything.
Yeah.
People will generally not seek to use, it usually happens when you've got massive queues everywhere.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a choice people make, but you do notice if you go to an environment, women have this experience as a very universal experience, usually in an event but much more commonly even at standard shopping centres now, the queues will be out the door. That is when you will see people making the choice to use. So I think the best way to address the overuse of disability toilets is to actually provide sufficient numbers of accessible toilets.
Just turning to you, Mr. Hayes, if I could. In your written submission, you raise a really important issue that we've been talking about a lot, which is these two types of toilets, kind of speaking broadly. So the more sort of old-fashioned communal toilet where you share public space, as compared to the more modern single-use cubicle. And I was just wondering if you could just talk to us about what that old-style toilet can be like for someone, for example, with autism or other people that are neurodiverse.
Well, thank you very much for your question. In my own experience, with the traditional communal style toilet for someone on the spectrum, it can be quite overwhelming. It was, always, like my parents could always, they could, testify and say that, when going out, one of their biggest nightmares was taking me to a toilet because, it's a very loud, very overwhelming place. I noticed that, like hand dryers, especially multiple hand dryers going off can be quite overwhelming. Often there's a lot of flickering lights and you have the sinks going off and, and people chatting and, the toilets flushing and stuff like that. And it's in a, very wide, very open space, so, a lot of the sounds reverberate, around the entire room. So it can be significantly overwhelming for people on the spectrum, and it can make it very difficult to, access community toilets. Like, if there's not a toilet, there's not an accessible toilet, say, often a lot of people on the spectrum, they'll try to not use the accessible toilet where possible, but often most places it's just a matter of last resort is to use an accessible bathroom. And if there isn't one available, or there's been people in the past who've been aggressive to them about using the accessible bathroom, they won't go back to that place again. They won't go back to that swimming pool. They won't go back to that doctor's office. They won't go back to that shopping centre. They won't go back to that train station again. So the existing communal toilets at the moment is being on the spectrum is honestly one of the worst nightmares that you could have. So transitioning to sort of that newer compartment style system would be significantly better for people on the spectrum.
So do you think the impact of that sort of environment is such that for some people on the spectrum, they might actually just be not using public toilets?
Yes.
Because they just find it too discomforting?
Yes. They won't go to, they won't go to the toilet. They won't, and, they just won't use the toilet there. And, and sometimes they won't even, they'll avoid that entire place, that entire shopping centre or that entire shop, just, because of that.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks, Jen.
We do have a couple of our committee members online on WebEx, so apologies that you can't see them, but we might go to Mrs. McDonald.
Thank you so much. I was wondering, Ms. Davies, you mentioned in your, I think it was your opening statement, that when you're going out, where every single accessible toilet is. I was just wondering, do you think it would be of benefit if there was an audit of accessible public toilets that are managed by councils and state government, whether an audit should be undertaken, and if so, what would be the inclusions of what you would say an accessible toilet is?
So just to be clear, I didn't limit myself to accessible toilets. I just know where any toilet is. There was a wonderful app that was a Dunny, Great Australian Dunny, where you could actually log toilets. While I thought that was an incredible initiative, to be perfectly honest, I never did it. So if there were to be resources put into that, what's much easier for me is I know the types of places where I can count on there being a toilet. So I know that I can run into a fancy 5-star hotel because I'm lucky and I can have the confidence to take my daughter into a place. But I do know I know a train station, I know a shopping centre, so if there were resources, I'd love it put into building people's awareness of the types of places there will be toilets and making sure those toilets were available and clean and accessible, because you tend to think of that more than looking something up or evaluating something. You're always thinking, okay, well, I know if I get to this place, there will be a toilet that I can go and find, and it will be open, and it will be something I can use. So that would be what if we can build out capacity and stock in places where people can predict and expect that there will be toilets, that's what we tend to count on. And particularly what councils could audit and provide information about, and possibly signage, is opening hours. It would be great to have much more information about opening hours, and particularly we find after 6 o'clock you really have to think about, even in Sydney, in the city, you really have to think about what toilet is going to be open and where, particularly for public toilets.
Thank you. And Mr. Hayes, I was wondering if you could describe what a fully inclusive and accessible public toilet should look like from your perspective.
So thank you very much for your question. It depends on depends on the situation. There are multiple different types, that need to be, in that spot. Sometimes for, people like me, just sort of that, single compartment, thing is fine for me. Sometimes it, needs to be, a wheelchair accessible bathroom, enough room to bring the wheelchair in, being able to independently transfer, from the wheelchair onto the toilet, and also, having the sink at the right level and everything at the correct level. And for some people, it needs to be, a proper hoist system, larger change table as well, and enough room for, both the person, the person with the disability and also their carer as well, to, be able to look after them as well. So it depends, it depends, and there's, multiple different varieties that are required for different situations.
Thank you. And I was wondering how important it is to include, and this can be to anybody, neurodiverse individuals in the design process for public toilets, because to me it appears that that's not happening at the moment. So I think it should be included, maybe if competent. Then that's my final question.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely vital that, people who are neurodiverse and, all different kinds of disabilities, those with lived experience, to be actively involved, in the discussion, with, pretty much anything that I have seen. Pretty much every single project I've seen, every single program I've seen, it's, there are significantly better outcomes for, for people with disability, people with hidden disabilities, people who are neurodivergent, when those people with lived experience are on the table, discussing it, just like what I'm doing here today. So I think it's absolutely vital.
Thank you.
I might also add, just quickly, in response to that question, the reason why I had to go and start a whole architecture firm tailored towards neurodiverse individuals and their needs is because designers, architects, builders, they don't have experience working within the disability sector. They're not mandated to, currently we have those SDA homes under the NDIS scheme, and it's a great initiative, but again, because these designers haven't worked in group home settings themselves, they haven't been exposed to behavior practitioners, psychologists, families, participants, they don't truly understand the day-to-day of an individual living with any type of disability. So we really need to revisit how our designers gain experience when it comes to accessing the designs for these spaces, both externally and internally.
Thank you so much again to all of you. We're out of time this morning. We really appreciate the time you've taken to share your experience and your expertise with us this morning. And if there are supplementary questions from the committee, the Secretariat will be in touch with you about those.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you for making the time to give evidence today. Can we start by stating your name and position title and taking either the oath or the affirmation?
So my name is Ms. Neve Joyce. I'm here from the Inner City Legal Centre, and I'll make the affirmation now. So I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Would you like to start by making a short opening statement?
Yes, so like I said, my name is Neve. I am here representing the Inner City Legal Centre. We are a community legal centre that provides free legal advice and representation. We've been based in the inner city area since the 1980s. And because of that location, we've had a strong focus on assisting LGBTQ and sex worker communities for quite some time, and we hold ourselves as representing that community for quite some years. And to this day, I run the Transgender Diverse Legal Service as well there. Through that work, we have quite close connections and relationships with our clients, and we're able to, and I'm hoping to speak today about some of the experiences, mostly from the transgender diverse community, and some of the issues that we've seen rising, particularly in relation to public toilets. Broadly speaking, everyone should have the right to access public facilities, including public toilets, in safety, and without unnecessary like harm or fear or discomfort. We've seen, and I've seen in particular with the transgender diverse community, that there's been strong fear, basically, about accessing public toilets and if they're going to be safe for transgender diverse people to use. And that has led to really strong avoidance behaviours, so people are avoiding using public toilets at all, from fear of harassment or being misgendered or facing some sort of negative interaction, I guess. And that avoidance of using public toilets, which is a really important and basic facility, and can lead to straight up health problems. So people like holding in their pee for hours on end, which is, I'm not a doctor, but that's definitely not good for your health. And also having subsequent effects like feeling socially isolated, not being confident, going out and enjoying other parts of the city or the state, and participating in social life because of there's that fear about not being able to use the toilet when they get there. And that's my opening statement.
Thank you very much. I might start with a couple of my own questions, and thank you for the written submission that was provided as well. I'm interested specifically, I suppose, in your perspective as a legal centre, and we're speaking to a number of people later today with lived experience from the transgender diverse community. The written submission raises this issue of over-policing and criminalisation relating to the use of public toilets. Could you explain that in more detail?
Yeah. I think it's probably helpful to frame it as like an important case study. So if we look at historically, and sometimes today as well, the over-policing of public bathrooms, if they're perceived to be what we call as beats, for people who don't know, is like an Australian slang for a particular location where gay men or men who have sex with men might meet up to have particular kinds of encounters. And certainly historically, and perhaps and still to this day to a degree, we see that these locations are given perhaps undue attention or moral concern, and have been the side of over-policing, and we've seen the negative effects of that. In cases where individuals also have other intersections of marginalisation, so for example people who are homeless and LGBTQT, where there might be really limited access to private spaces, we're seeing the effects of over-policing of public bathrooms generally, but also when they are also used as beats as well. And the impact of that can sort of lead to like a spiralling, I guess, of other legal issues that can arise from that moment of over-policing as well.
Thank you. I just have a follow-up question, and then we'll swear in our second witness. Welcome. There was a specific case study provided in the written submission that I understand was provided with consent from the HIV/AIDS Legal Centre. It was a pretty distressing anecdote of someone who was viewed through a gap in the toilet door by a police officer and subsequently charged. Is this something that we should be addressing through design of public toilets, by actually having full height lockable doors?
Absolutely, and I think there's a range of benefits to having fully private cubicles. We've heard from it's not just an issue for transgender diverse people or LGBTQ people, but also people with disabilities who have sensory issues. For everybody, I think they would like complete privacy when using a toilet. And I think those case studies really highlighted when someone is perhaps already under additional scrutiny or additional suspicion, I guess, by the general public, then what should really be a very private space and a very safe space can become not safe. And so through design, I think that we can eliminate some of these issues. So having fully private cubicles being a key way to do that.
Thank you. We might swear in our second witness. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Could you state your name and position title and take either the oath or the affirmation?
Yeah, Sasha Bailey, PhD candidate at the University of Sydney. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Do
And
you have
apologies, I'm late. I was in the wrong room. I was like, oh my God, this is about roads, not toilets. So I was like running over, but thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. Do you have an opening statement?
Yes, thank you.
Go ahead.
Good morning, all. I'm Sasha Bailey, pronouns she, her, and I'm a PhD candidate at the Matilda Centre for Research in Mental Health and Substance Use, University of Sydney. More recently, I've started as a research fellow within the Department of Medicine at the University of Melbourne. My research broadly focuses on understanding the mental health and well-being of trans and gender diverse populations. Our submission to the inquiry can be distilled into 3 key recommendations. 1, to ensure adequate provision of all gender-neutral toilets. 2, to ensure all gender-neutral toilets are consistently and equitably provided across all public settings, particularly schools and other educational settings, sports and recreational facilities, and workplaces. And lastly, 3, to provide change management plans and high-quality training and education resources to support implementation of all gender-neutral toilets. There are multiple benefits offered to a diverse range of people from the wider availability of all gender-neutral toilets. Our recommendations, however, are mainly weighted with consideration of implications specifically for trans and gender diverse people, which I'll henceforth refer to respectfully and inclusively as trans people, who face a range of issues relating to toilet access, which have been shown to increase risk of poor mental health and well-being. This is a particularly concerning issue because trans communities are already well known to disproportionately bear higher rates of mental ill health relative to their cisgender peers in the general population. Thank you.
Thank you. One question from me, and then I'll go to other committee members. I suppose in terms of those health impacts on trans people, and I'm using that as an umbrella term the way that you have, what are the health impacts on people when they can't actually access a toilet that's safe to use in a public space?
Absolutely. So there's sort of 2 questions, I suppose, within that. Firstly, there's what are these toilet access issues that we refer to? And it can really be distilled into 2 key issues. The first, we talk about there being anxiety about accessing the toilets, avoidance of accessing the toilets, and uniquely associated physical and mental health issues. And then secondly, there being discrimination that prevents access to the toilets, like being prevented or discouraged, as well as actual violence and abuse and negative experiences within the toilets. The main evidence that we have about the mental health impacts comes from international studies. In terms of mental health outcomes associated with anxiety and avoidance of pre-access to toilets. There was a large 2021 survey of over 12,000 trans young people aged 13 to 24, which found that nearly half of folks reported sometimes avoiding public bathrooms due to concerns around using them, and nearly 1 in 5 always avoided them. And among those folks who always or sometimes avoided these bathrooms, the odds of attempting suicide in the preceding 12 months were twice as high compared to trans youth peers who'd never reported avoiding public bathrooms. And although this is cross-sectional evidence, these analyses did adjust for age, sexuality, race, ethnicity, income, and US Census region. In terms of outcomes associated with discrimination preventing access, which is often the most common issue that's been researched in the literature, there's been a 2018 survey of over 7,000 trans youth, which found that alongside highly prevalent rates of bathroom discrimination defined as being prevented or discouraged from using the bathroom corresponding to your gender identity, significantly increased odds of depressive mood, seriously considering suicide, twice as likely to report both a suicide attempt and multiple suicide attempts in the preceding 12 months. Similarly, these analyses also conjusted for the usual suspects of demographic covariates. And all the measures were validated measures of mental health, extensively used in the past. Similarly, the seminal 2015 US transgender survey of over 25,000 trans people, largest sample to date in the history of the world, asked about in the preceding 12 months whether anyone had told you whether or asked you if you were using the wrong bathroom, this idea of just being questions about bathroom choice. People with recent suicidal ideation and serious psychological distress were significantly more likely to report that they had avoided using public bathrooms due to fear of having problems using them. And lastly, a study from China, over 7,000 trans people in mainland China, all of the provinces, autonomous regions and cities represented, finding that speaking to those actual negative experiences in there, verbal abuse in the public restroom, sexual abuse in a public restroom, negative consequences of avoiding public restrooms, significantly associated with higher levels of anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress, suicidality, and self-harm, again, adjusted for those same covariates.
Thank you. I might go to other members of the committee.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to you both for your submissions. They're really useful. The first question I wanted to ask is a general question for you both. I've noticed that with council-built public toilets in different areas, that the modern style is to build a single-use cubicle that's accessible from public space. And I've noticed in facilities where there's quite a few of them that you'll commonly have a disability accessible one, and then you might have a unisex one, and then you might have a male and a female one. And I'm just interested in what are the arguments for and against for having a single-use cubicle exclusively for male or female? And I ask that because I can understand some of the arguments about why a shared public space toilet where you've got cubicles, why people are in favour of gender segregation there. But I've never quite understood why a single-use cubicle should be allocated for male or female, given that people don't share the space in there. So I'm just curious about your thoughts about that, maybe starting with you, Miss Joyce, and then Miss Bailey.
From experience, looking at other kind of cases and the clients that we've talked to, the single-use toilets, I would say, is the better option, and having, if where possible, like only all gender bathrooms. Where if it's only a single-use toilet, like you're going to be in there by yourself, I can't really see a reason for having it be gendered. I have had the personal experience of waiting, and there's just one male-only single-use toilet available, and it seemed very stupid indeed. Yeah. I have had a look at a lot of the other submissions and things that have been said at this inquiry, but not all of them, so I may have missed something. And I hadn't seen anybody raise a concern about using a single-use cubicle that's used by different genders, that for any reason, for a particular reason other than perhaps explicitly transphobic reasons. So I do think that the all-gender bathrooms being the main ones that are available is the best choice, yes.
Yeah, the only thing that occurred to me was maybe that men are considered to be more messy, but that was the only one I could think of.
Perhaps, yeah.
Miss Bailey, what are your thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I can only speak to the mental health equity implications as they pertain to trans people, and I suppose when we think about trans people reporting common experiences of avoiding toilets, having anxiety about toilets, binary sort of designation of these facilities is what contributes directly to those feelings of anxiety and avoidance. And so I suppose to answer your question, that there's a mental health sort of prevention argument to be made. Yeah.
Okay, in terms of having gender segregation for single-use cubicles?
Keeping keeping them sort of gender neutral.
Yeah, all gender, okay.
And if I may add as well, I think having them gendered, particularly where there's no utility to it, it's a single-use cubicle, it creates a site of potential conflict, and it creates a site of contention that I don't see why that needs to be there. Where we've seen, transgender diverse people being accosted or interviewed or grilled about which bathroom they're using and why, and indeed, cisgender people as well. by having the single-use cubicles gendered, it just creates a point of conflict for needlessly. And we have seen, you know, harassment arise there. We have seen violence come up when the bathrooms are gendered, and we have seen, you know, potentially discrimination and things like this arising. So it seems to be creating a problem, I feel, rather than when we could design the issue out, basically, by having the single-use, all gender single-use cubicles only. Yes.
So where I live in Dubbo, we recently, for the first time in a long time, maybe in decades, had a new public toilet built in a park, so there's no space issues there, with male, female, and then an MLAC, large disability accessible toilet. I'm not aware of any other council still building old style cement boys girls toilets. What's your reaction to that in 2024 or 2023 maybe it was built? That we've still actually got councils that where space is not an issue, still building male, female facilities that aren't single-use cubicles. What's your thoughts on that?
I can see that being a barrier for non-binary people or gender diverse people and some other transgender people as well. To which bathroom should they use? They need to pee just like everybody else, and it just creates a point of stress or conflict, I think, unnecessarily. That would be my comment on that.
Yeah, as you've pointed out earlier, it is a quite easy strategy to actualise in terms of designating all single-stall restrooms as all gender neutral. Whether policy reflects evidence, I suppose, that in favour is, there needs to be consultation to sort of account for the variance in practices.
So am I correct in understanding both of your submissions, or the submission that you're not advocating that all public toilets should be made all gender? You're rather advocating that all gender facilities should be available, and there should be more of them, and they should be available everywhere ideally. Is that a fair understanding of your submission?
Perhaps I won't speak to the practicalities of renovating all of the bathrooms in New South Wales. I might leave that aside. I would say that having all gender single-use cubicles is best practice in terms of making things available and safe for transgender diverse people. But I think it also serves the needs of quite a few different members of the community and a few different types of needs as well, in terms of privacy, disability access, and things like that as well.
Yeah. So in your submission, in your centre's submission, on I think it's the second page, under best practice design, it says 1, female, male, unisex signage should be replaced with all gender signage. So I just wanted to give you a chance to respond, because we've had sort of various reporting of things in this inquiry. Like, is that a suggestion that uniformly we should abolish gender distinctions in public toilets? Or is it rather saying that where you've got a toilet that can be an all gender toilet, that there should be all gender signage?
There definitely should be all gender bathrooms available everywhere where people need to go to the bathroom. Perhaps I won't speak to the practicalities of all the renovations of all the bathrooms in New South Wales, but I think it should be the goal to have all gender bathrooms as the main bathrooms, or perhaps the only bathrooms that are available. From the perspective of greater inclusion, and making sure that everybody feels safe to use bathrooms, because everybody wants privacy. Everyone wants to, I assume most people would like the benefit of a sink and the toilet in the same room, and also to not queue unnecessarily when there are bathrooms available. I can't speak to every location across New South Wales, but that is the general best practice approach, I would say, yes.
Sure. So when you say that we should be moving to a situation where all gender toilets are the norm, you mean in the context of single-use cubicles?
Yes.
Yeah.
Can I ask just on this issue about signage, is there a convention in terms of all gender signage? Like, is there consensus about what that looks like?
It's never a consensus, but I would say that all gender bathrooms is what we would say is that all gender as the words used as perhaps being a good way to go. I think we provided examples from the Trans Hub website, which had I think they call it like purpose-based signage rather than like identity-based signage. So rather than saying this bathroom is for men, you could just have a picture of a urinal, and people who need to use a urinal, they can figure it out for themselves. And it's about letting the user decide what facility makes sense for them, rather than assuming or imposing a particular gender identity for unnecessarily on what is a facility that people can use and figure out if they need to use it or not themselves. And that works. That's not just in regards to gendering bathrooms, but also in terms of like, is it disability friendly? What type of accessibility features there are within the bathroom? Does it have a baby change room? Does it have a urinal? Or all of those things as well. Yeah. And so I think the examples that we provide is just a picture literally of a toilet that says all gender bathroom, and then variations of that as well. Yeah.
So, Ms. Bailey, I might go to you on that question that I asked, and I think, am I correct in understanding in the centre submission on page 4, recommendation 1, ensure adequate provision of all gender-neutral toilets? So you're not advocating some wholesale, immediate transition to all gender toilets for everyone. You're rather saying that there should be adequate provision of all gender toilets.
Yeah, that's correct. Subject to allocation of limited resources in most settings. And I suppose in a lot of settings, new construction isn't feasible, can't be funded, and those recommendations are sort of in that spirit.
I just wanted to ask that because we've had some sort of mischievous reporting in different publications about this inquiry and some mischaracterisation of submissions, I think, and it's been put, for example, that people are advocating things that I don't think on a fair reading of their submission they've actually been advocating, which is why I just wanted to raise that. That's all my questions, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you. I had a question about accessible toilets, and this has been brought to our attention because some facilities will have gendered toilets and then advertise that there's an all-gender or a unisex accessible toilet. And we've also heard from people with lived experience of disability that they strongly prefer for that only to be used by people who have accessibility needs. Interested in your views if that's adequate provision of an all-gender toilet, or if we really need to have separate non-disability all-gender toilets.
Yes, I think there needs to be not non-disability all-gender single-use cubicles. For transgender diverse people who don't have a disability, it's awkward or not appropriate to be using the disability bathroom or the accessible bathroom when that is specifically allocated for people who have access needs. It's not appropriate, and there should be separate all-gender bathrooms. And for example, we've heard from clients where they're hanging out with friends, and then everyone goes to the bathroom, and it's awkward or it's inappropriate for them to not be using a specific bathroom, but instead using the accessible bathroom when it's obvious that they don't have, for themselves, they know they don't have an access need like that. It's a little bit of a cop-out, if I can say that, to say that there's an disability or accessible bathroom and therefore we have all gender bathrooms. It doesn't remove the unnecessarily gendering of bathrooms and the unnecessary creating of a controversy, I feel, where there doesn't need to be one, particularly when they're single-use cubicles.
Just to add, and also harking back to your earlier comment about best practice signage, avoiding identity-based signage, preferring use-based signage. Use-based signage accommodates gender inclusivity, but also accessibility requirements for other toilet patrons. Those needs aren't mutually exclusive necessarily, subject to allocation of limited resources.
I just had another question about this question of sort of signage and communication. We've heard a lot in this inquiry about tools like the National Toilet Map app and town signage provided by council or other ways that people find information about toilets and what's available. In your experience, is it communicated whether the toilets are gender segregated or all gender toilets? Can people actually find out if that's their main accessibility need? Is that information available?
I'm not too sure. I would have to come back to you on that.
You're welcome to take questions on notice. That's all right.
There have been lots of circumstances where there isn't clear information available online or before attending a particular location, yes. I've seen some really wonderful best practice, particularly in spaces that are used by the LGBTQ community and transgender and diverse community, where the really clear information is available way ahead of time of a particular event or before going to a particular location about what the bathroom situation is, which obviously has great assistance for people with access needs, but also for people who are transgender and diverse who are wanting to know what the situation is. And like, and that can include signage at the front or near the entrance kind of area as well. And there's been, I think, quite a beautiful practice in different LGBT event spaces where whatever the built-in bathrooms are available, they've just stuck a piece of paper over the top and said this is now an all-gender bathroom, and had quite nice, I guess, that's been seen as quite inclusive and quite helpful, and it's been quite a nice experience for the attendees, I guess, to have that stress and that point of contention removed completely when at an event. And so I think standardization of bathroom signs might be very helpful. And again, looking at that use-based signage rather than identity-based signage being quite helpful as well. And then perhaps anecdotally, I've seen the strangest symbols being used as like sort of an interpretive art of what gender is to help, which I think could be confusing for everybody about, is a circle the male or the female bathroom, or is a triangle, like, which is to make this the strangest one. But you can see how that would add even more stress and confusion for people who are gender diverse, and perhaps even more unnecessary conversations about whose gender is what when we're just all trying to be. So I think standardising of the signage might be very helpful, yes.
I also just had a question about terminology. For all gender bathrooms, you often hear gender neutral or unisex or other. So it seems to be a broad diversity of terms that are used to try to describe this. Do you have a strong preference in terms of what best practice language actually should be when we're talking about this?
Other than just saying, I think all gender is the best terminology, I would say that we're probably modelling that off of other organisations that have done have more of a focus on research in this area, such as the Transcel website and some of the research that we've referred to as well. Yeah.
All gender or gender neutral, yeah. I suppose technically some trans people identify as agender, that is not having a gender at all, and all gender could be construed as like presupposing their possession of a gender. All gender, gender neutral.
Thanks.
I've got a few more if you want to.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So, Miss Bailey, I see some stuff in the Sydney Uni submission about educational facilities. That's at 2.21 on page 6. It's just interested if you could expand on this issue of loos in, I guess, schools, but also other educational facilities.
Yes, certainly. We're seeing that the aforementioned toilet access issues, those prevalence rates are particularly pronounced within school and educational settings. And I suppose my co-authors and I intentionally highlighted this because majority of mental disorders emerge during adolescence, and mental ill health disparities between trans people and cisgender people emerge during adolescence and actually widen throughout adolescence. And so when we keep coming back to this argument about preventing mental ill health burden, it's especially critical that we address that during adolescence, particularly in relation to toilets.
Yeah. And how are most schools dealing with accessibility for trans youth in this respect, like public schools, for example?
We don't have a lot of data about contemporary practice. I can take that question on notice and
Sure. Yeah, sure. Thank you, Miss Joyce. I think the centre's submission refers to over policing of public toilets. Is that right? If I remember that correctly.
Yeah.
Just wonder if you could maybe expand on that.
Yeah. So this relates to sort of what I mentioned in the introduction about. I guess what I wanted to do was refer to the historical and perhaps current over-policing of public toilets, particularly if we look in the historical context of like beats and over-policing public toilets when they're used by gay men. I think it provides a really interesting, a helpful case study to look at how we identify what is and isn't a problem when it comes to behaviours and uses of public toilets. A couple of decades ago, like homosexuality was criminalised, and we saw public toilets as like a site of major contention, as a site of criminalisation and a site of real harm, I think, for our communities. And it was seen as a huge problem. Nowadays, it's not seen as a huge problem, and it's not that behaviours or people have changed. It's that the way that we've seen this issue as a problem has changed. Obviously, there's a lot of things that have happened between perhaps if we make it 1980s as like a benchmark to now, in terms of like the human rights, I guess, approach to looking at LGBT issues and decriminalisation of homosexuality, the access to rights and services, and a whole bunch of things that have happened. But I think it's a useful case study for looking at when we think about problems that are happening in public bathrooms, instead of trying to think about how we can make people or behaviours go away, thinking about what needs are here and how can we be addressing them better as a community, and having that sort of human rights approach that's looking to see how we can serve all members of our community, perhaps not just some privileged types of people in the community, and see how we can serve that through public facilities, whether that's public toilets or other kinds of facilities and services available in the community. And if I can say as well, through this inquiry and having a look at some of the transcript from the earlier hearing as well, I think a really nice theme has emerged about there's so many reasons why people want to use a public toilet. I spilled coffee on myself, or you need to use the bathroom, or like just a moment of privacy. And there's so many almost very beautifully human reasons, I guess, that people want to use the bathroom. And I think if we start looking at public toilets as a site for a little moment of privacy, or I think someone said like relaxation, or safety in a public space, I think we're going to be framing public toilets and then what we consider problems or not problems in public toilets completely differently. And I think that's a really helpful framework to be looking at the design more holistically as well.
So your submission on the last page talks about the HIV/AIDS Legal Centre, which is a different organisation from you guys, isn't it? Has received reports from clients of New South Wales Police staking out public toilets for people engaging in sexual acts. Is that anything that you've got more information about, this sort of staking out practice? Is that still occurring?
Unfortunately not. This was case studies that we received from our friends at another community legal centre. I don't think I'm able to provide much. I would not want to provide much more detail about that in case I've misunderstood something exact about the cases. But there certainly was raised with me that there was a series of incidences where LGBT, usually gay men, but not always, were repeatedly having quite negative interactions with the police in bathrooms, including the police coming into bathrooms at various points. But more than that, I don't think I have enough information to confidently go into more detail on that point. I
mean, it's obviously hard to judge without sort of knowing the facts of particular matters, but
of course,
I know that in the past there was, I think, and to put it neutrally, an over allocation of police resources into such matters.
Absolutely,
it'd be a concern if that was occurring again. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. One last question from me for Ms. Bailey. Just coming back right at the start, I'd asked about impact on trans people of not being able to safely access toilets when needed, and you provided a really excellent overview of international literature, mostly focused on mental health. I just wanted to follow that up specifically to look at physical health as well. you put a point in the written submission that trans people have developed urinary tract or kidney infections or other kidney-related problems from excessive periods of urine retention. That's really concerning. Can you just talk us through some of that evidence?
Yes, absolutely. So that was noted in the in Australia. It's been noted in the Writing Themselves in 4 study of over 6,000 queer and trans young Australians, including over 1,400 trans youth, which found that around 7% had developed a urinary tract infection, kidney infection, or other kidney-related problem in the preceding 12 months in relation to toilet access. Nearly 2 in 5 had, within the past year, also limited how much they'd eaten or drank to avoid having to go to the toilet. Whilst there hasn't been further analyses looking at associations with these exposures and physical health outcomes, but those issues in themselves, I suppose, constitute physical health issues.
Absolutely, thank you. Before we go to morning tea, is there anything that you were particularly keen to share with the committee that we haven't asked about?
Actually, I wanted to say I quite liked in your submission talking about having oversight over change happening throughout the processes, and I think that particularly for large public facilities where there might be staff or security available around bathrooms, with a change of policy or a change of approach, or even just clarifying current rules, training and a conversation with staff or security that are around bathroom spaces, and perhaps cleaners as well, that is explicitly transgender, diverse, inclusive, can also have a place as well. Where a couple of cases that I've seen of quite bad transgender diverse discrimination regarding bathroom use has often come from staff who are related to that bathroom in some way, whether it's like a security of a private venue or cleaning staff or something like this. And so I think there's a real opportunity there for people who have that kind of custodianship, I guess, around the bathrooms, having some additional training or additional clarification that these bathrooms do need to be transgender diverse inclusive.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just wanted to pass on as well apologies from my colleague Emma, who was unable to attend today. She was really disappointed. She's just feeling under the weather, but it's...
Thank you. Thank you so much again for sharing your time and expertise with us today. I think there were a couple of questions taken on notice, and if there are any supplementary questions from committee members, the Secretary will be in touch with you about those.
Thank you.
Thank you. time to give evidence today. We'll start on my left. Can you state your name and position title and take either the oath or the affirmation?
Sure. My name is Barbara Taylor. I'm a parent representative with Parents for Trans Youth Equity. I swear that the evidence now and about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
My name is Lannan Donnelly. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the founding director of Parents for Trans Youth Equity, and I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
My name is Kate Toyer. I am representing the Illawarra Shoalhaven Gender Alliance. My pronouns are she, her. I pay my respects to elders of Gadigal country. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
And I'm Rory Gillard, and my pronouns are they, them, and I represent the Sydney BIPLUS Network and also the Trans Justice Project. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
My name is Elster Cook, and I'm a volunteer representing the Trans Justice Project. My pronouns are she, it, and I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Would you like to start by making a short opening statement? We might go in the same order if that's okay.
Sure. Today we're representing Parents for Trans Youth Equity, known as PTI. We are a volunteer group, mostly parents and carers, who seek to ensure that all transgender and gender diverse or trans youth are treated with respect, fairness and equity. We welcome this inquiry and we see it as an opportunity to share how improving the provision, the accessibility and the inclusivity of public toilets across New South Wales can improve the lives of trans youth. In our submission today, we draw on our lived experience as families of trans children and young people, which has also led us to undertake and publish peer-reviewed research in partnership with Western Sydney University. We see the Department of Education and other education providers as key implementers of the inquiry's outcomes, both in providing appropriate facilities as well as an environment where it is safe for trans youth to access the toilet that aligns with the gender that they identify with. This includes all gender toilets. Trans youth are limiting their fluid and food intake to avoid having to use the toilet at school. This is unacceptable that young people have to do this to get through the school day. New South Wales research has found, and our experiences confirm, that toilets are one of the greatest concerns of parents of trans youth that require negotiation with schools. It should not be up to parents to have to intervene and educate school staff so that their child can access appropriate toilet facilities.
Whilst we acknowledge that the New South Wales Department of Education is not a strong focal point of this inquiry, the government funds public school toilets. School is where most of us learn public toilet etiquette, and accordingly it's also the first place our unconditionally loved and supported trans children face overt discrimination. We've outlined in our submission the problematic lack of consistent, clear, accessible direction and guidance to schools when it comes to our kids. Whether our child can access the toilet of their known gender during school hours does not depend upon the department, the school district, or even the school itself. It often depends on the situation at the time they need to relieve themselves. Our children have to navigate on their own in the playground where the toilet use at school is safe at any time, depending on their awareness levels of which kids and which teachers are in the vicinity. The Department of Education has no central unit for schools to understand, clarify and ensure consistent application of their responsibility towards trans kids and their human rights. The only available guidance for schools is an inaccessible document called Bulletin 55, which is over a decade old and no longer fit for purpose. In short, the Department of Education is in chaos when it comes to trans students and their right to toilet. Our kids' education is suffering, their mental health is suffering, and their overall well-being is diminished. When the 1.2 million students across New South Wales go out into the wider community and use public toilets, If they've witnessed unchallenged discrimination against trans kids, it can foster hate and assaults against our kids. This then perpetuates into adulthood. Rather than navigating unnecessary, discriminatory and sometimes violent barriers, we hope this inquiry will lead to trans youth being able to focus on living their best life. Thank you.
Thank you. The Illawarra Shoalhaven Gender Alliance represents and advocates for trans and gender diverse people on the south coast of New South Wales, covering an area from Wollongong to the far south coast of New South Wales, the Dharawal and Yuin nations. Trans and gender diverse people come from all walks of life, young, old, parents, single people, people with a disability and people with a chronic illness. Our advocacy centres around the need for universally accessible design. Universally accessibly designed toilets benefit everyone in society, not just trans and gender diverse people. And it is this that we advocate for.
Growing up as a trans kid in regional Australia, there were many difficulties in life. I was subject to harassment, threats of violence, and many other things, all whilst powers that be, such as schools and even police officers when asked, did nothing to help. On top of all that, I was denied access to basic human decency in the form of not being allowed to use bathrooms, for if I were to use a men's bathroom, I risked violence, harassment, threats, being followed and jeered at, amongst other things. Whilst women's bathrooms were slightly kinder to me, I still faced much the same experience, and at times was followed into them by men. Accessible bathrooms also had their issues, where they were often locked or had some other barrier to entry. So I was left to either endure the discomfort that came with not having access to a bathroom, which I often found myself subject to, or dealing with everything that came with using a public bathroom. This is not a one-of-a-kind experience either. Trans youth across Australia and New South Wales experience much the same thing, and it is not a situation they should have to be in due to the risk due to their mental health and other such issues. So I sincerely back the Trans Justice Project's submission and recommendation for this inquiry, so that we may push towards a safer, more accepting and fairer world.
And I just want to stress that the joint submission by Elster and myself on behalf of our networks, we're not just arguing for all gender toilets on the basis of it creates safer environments for trans and gender diverse people, or for people who are perceived to be trans and gender diverse. We also really want to stress the broad range of communities that really benefit from the creation of all gender toilets. And so that includes, people who would usually use women's toilets, given the higher wait times for women's toilets in comparison to men's toilets. Studies show that all gender bathrooms reduce wait times for people who would ordinarily use women's toilets. Also parents and caregivers who have a child who they're looking after who's a different gender to them. All gender bathrooms are also beneficial for people with disabilities entering with a carer who's a different gender to them. And to support the change to all gender toilets that we're arguing for, we've developed some sample signage that can be placed in all gender bathrooms, which we'd like to table.
Please.
Another big icon thing to the side and like a, thanks.
Thank you. We might go to questions. Just starting with a couple from me. You've just tabled this document, so I've got a couple of questions from that. Can you talk us through where the sample signage has come from? Is this a real sign that's in existence? What's informed this recommendation?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So at the end of the document, we've basically mentioned that this is based on some signage that has appeared in it was created by the University of Sydney Union. So this is signage based on signage that was placed by the University of Sydney Union in all gender bathrooms at the University of Sydney. We've made some slight amendments because of our recommendations, but yeah, that's where it's, we've done some slight amendments, but that's where it's been based off.
Okay, great, thank you. I might ask a broad question to all of you to start with, and some of this was touched on in your opening statements. You were probably listening in the previous session. We heard a lot of data and academic research around the impact of toilet availability and accessibility on trans and gender diverse people, but I'm interested in your own experiences and the people that you're representing today. What it means when all gender or safe toilets aren't actually available for trans people, whether that's children or adults. How does that impact people?
I think they mentioned previously in the previous session how our children are developing urinary tract infections. They are developing kidney problems as well because they're not going to the toilet because it's not when it's not safe. They're not going. They can't go. They have no choice. Some are limiting fluid intake throughout their entire school day, as Barbara mentioned, and it's just they're limiting food as well. Like it's just so detrimental to their health when safe toilets are not available. Oh, actually, can I also add that my son, once he was comfortable in his skin after he came out as trans, he would use school toilets only during class time because he knew that there'd be nobody in there, that it's outside of lunch and recess. And so our children are also missing out on education as well. It impacts them significantly.
Thank you.
I would refer the committee to our submission where we have a number of lived experiences within our submission. I would also add the comment that the use of public restrooms is probably the only situation where I have actually been publicly harassed, by someone who was accused me of being inappropriately entering a public facility. This is obviously quite impactful mental health wise. I would also add from personal experience that the availability, particularly of universally accessibly designed toilets, is significant. I transitioned between my second and third child, my second child being a daughter and my third child being a son, and I transitioned between the two of them being toddlers. I was faced with the situation where when my second child was a young girl, and I was in a public taking her, we were going shopping, I was in the awkward situation of I had to either take her into the men's restroom, which obviously was an uncomfortable situation, and clearly I did not wish to be entering the women's restroom, an exclusively women's restroom. The situation ended up being reversed for me with my third child when I was presenting. A female had transitioned, present female, as I do today, and he felt incredibly uncomfortable, particularly as he started to become a little older, entering the women's restroom, and yet for me to enter the men's restroom was an uncomfortable situation. An exclusive men's restroom was an uncomfortable situation for myself. So I think that speaks to that universality of where all gendered bathrooms and particularly universally accessibly designed all gendered bathrooms very much are beneficial for everyone.
Speaking much from recent personal experience, as I'm only a recent high school graduate, it was something that really affected me throughout most of my school years because I came out near the start of high school, and from that point on things just weren't the same. I cannot count the number of times I was followed or had slurs yelled at me for going into bathrooms or the such, to the point where I gave up on going to bathrooms at school for a while and would skip school. I would leave the school at times so I could go to the bathroom at my home because it was close enough to do that rather than try and deal with that, which obviously comes with its own consequences of missing out on stuff like that. But it was from fear. I was receiving very real threats one time. I had people show up outside my house at times from stuff like that. And it was just sort of a culture of fear that I couldn't do like that. And it was really contributing to some physical health problems, and especially mental health problems. And even in public situations outside of school, I wore a mask nearly 24/7 because it helped. I found I experienced less harassment with that, but it was also, this was like pre-COVID and all such things, and it was not exactly comfortable. It caused like marks around my ears and like a lot of pain around there. But it was just because if I didn't do it, I was at so much more risk of facing harassment and all of that. And it was just like, it affected me a lot for a long time, especially mentally. And yeah, it's just that sort of experience that someone really shouldn't have to go through, and that, there's plenty of people in this country and state who have to go through something similar, which is awful.
Can I ask, was it a public school?
Yes, it was a public school.
And was there any support from the school administration in terms of trying to find, suitable adjustment to accommodate you?
Not really. In my last year of high school, I approached them about things like that and how I wasn't feeling safe at school because of things like that, and they essentially told me that I just had to deal with it.
Well, it's amazing that you came out of school. That's so incredibly brave.
Yeah.
What an amazing person you are.
Thank you.
I've got one more question from me, and then I'll come back to the other committee members. And I'll start with Dr. Toyer, but anyone else is welcome to chime in. I'm starting with Dr. Toyer because you've made a very clear recommendation around universal design of toilets, and we have heard some other evidence to that effect. But could you describe very specifically what you mean, what that design looks like?
What I am talking about, and apologies, excuse me for a second while I just put my glasses on. In particular, I'm talking about toilet facilities that are all gendered and are capable, are usable by people of all abilities. So whether that be people who have physical disabilities, being vision impaired, sort of mobility impaired, elderly, those with chronic illnesses, that mean that they have difficulty going to the toilet. And I think that this is, I have Crohn's, I've had bowel cancer and and a total colectomy and Crohn's. I need to use the toilet fairly frequently, to be honest. I'm reasonably able-bodied at this point, but certainly there are situations where you where if you've been hospitalised because you've been ill, like it's not physically easy to actually use a toilet facility, and to if you have a carer, if the carer is not same gender and all and all the toilet is not capable for the carer to actually come in and actually assist you, it becomes very difficult and it can be actually quite humiliating, because you are stuck in a situation where you you may have soiled yourself / you need assistance to actually clean up, and that's just not possible in single cubicles, in particularly in single gendered toilet facilities, which are not designed for this sort of thing. This is the this is that universal design concept, universally accessible design, not just accessible for anyone of any gender, but for anyone of any ability, is where we would like to see public toilet facilities progress to. We appreciate that obviously there are a large number of public toilet facilities and it will take time, but all public toilet facilities need updating and maintaining and renovating. There is no apparently obvious reason for that we can determine that stops us from actually, during those updates of maintenance of those facilities, that they can't be improved to actually to make them universally accessible.
Thank you. Go to the
Thanks,
members.
Chair, and
Go
thanks
ahead.
to you all for your submissions and attendance. It's really helpful. Just a bit of a general question first for you all to comment on maybe. I've noticed that local councils these days are often building toilet facilities where there's multiple single-use cubicles, which is obviously good. And it's quite common to have one disability accessible, one unisex, one male, one female, or some configuration where there's a mixture, but some are male, female. And I'm just wondering if you've got any thoughts on what the rationale is for having male, female toilets when they're single-use cubicles where people aren't sort of sharing that public space. And I was discussing this with some earlier witnesses and said that I can't really think of a rationale. If it's a single-use cubicle, why it wouldn't be all gender or unisex, whatever the terminology is. And I'm just wondering if you've got any thoughts, maybe starting with you, Ms. Cook.
Yeah, no, my thoughts are very much, it seems sort of needless to gender bathrooms that are identical to each other, that are all just single-use cubicles that could very well be all gender, and it only just serves as a way to it serves more of an inconvenience than anything else. Like if they were all unisex and 3 women were to need to go to the bathroom, they could all use them. But if the situation where there is like one male, one unisex and one women, it just causes an unnecessary wait instead of having all gender bathrooms, which would be much more efficient.
Yeah. What about you, Dr. Miller?
I think it's also really important when we're considering public policy around public bathrooms to look at the historical context for the gendering of bathrooms in contexts like Australia and the US. So, for instance, one thing we cited in our submission is a study called Changing Rooms for Gender Diversity, and that was done by Curtin University and the Equal Opportunity Commission. And something they mentioned there that we cite in our submission is that bathrooms didn't become gendered in places like the US until the late 1800s. And
really? So prior to that, they were just all gender open?
They were still based around the cisgender male norm.
Yeah.
And by cisgender, I mean not transgender. But I think it's also interesting if you read feminist literature on the development of gendering bathrooms in the Australian context, and consider what's been said in other contexts about the gendering, that one of the reasons for the gendering of restrooms has been based on the public sphere, the separate spheres ideology, the notion that women need to be separated from men because women are the lesser gender. And they need to be protected in the public sphere, and that's one of the biases that have shaped the gendering of public bathrooms. So I think that historical context also needs to be taken into account. And interestingly, if you read blogs on, articles on the gendering of restrooms around the world, there's one in the US context that talks about it wasn't because of these perceived natural differences between men and women in terms of, bodily differences. It wasn't about keeping women safer. It was about designating women as a lesser gender.
Interesting. In terms of the modern day, like accepting that as a theory of sort of current systems, I mean, men do commit, sort of having worked in the criminal law for a long time, do tend to commit sort of most criminal offences. And obviously, public toilets, people are sort of in a vulnerable position maybe, or not necessarily choosing to be in there. I mean, is there any policy rationale in your mind for gender segregation in terms of health or safety considerations, or do you see it as sort of wholly illegitimate?
So the reason, so we're arguing in our submission for all gender toilets. And so, Elster and I have chatted about this in terms of safety concerns. I think that there's lots of things that I could say about that, and I'll keep it to maybe 3 points. One is, there's some great sort of feminist literature out there that really speaks back to this notion that all gender bathrooms increase violence against people, including against women. So, some issues with that argument is it can deflect attention about the fact that the majority of violence against women, for instance, doesn't occur in public by a stranger. It occurs in private by somebody who knows the woman. Another thing is that all gender bathrooms aren't the cause of violence against women. For instance, it's patriarchy, it's misogyny, it's gender inequality, and those are the things that need to be addressed. And I know there's been a great campaign by New South Wales government called Street Harassment Has No Grey Area, and that's just about educating men about, if you call out to women in public, that's not a compliment, that's harassment. And I think if there's concerns, we're more interested in that kind of public education and changing behaviour. But also the notion that, for instance, all gender bathrooms can heighten violence. One of our primary concerns about that is there's a lack of empirical data that shows that in Australia and internationally. And that's something that's noted in the study that I just referenced, which is Changing Rooms for Gender Diversity by Curtin University and the Equal Opportunity Commission. There's lots of other things I can say, but I'll just keep it there.
Yeah, that's interesting. So accepting all of that, is there an argument along these lines for me? And I should say, I don't ask this question to argue that there should simply be male-female toilets. I'm a big advocate for all gender single-use cubicles, which seems to sort of deal with this issue. But accepting all of what you've said and taking into account, obviously, the critical need to focus on inclusivity and accessibility, whatever the origins of this system of gender segregation that we practice in so many different ways, whether legitimate or not, is there a concern, though, for example, that if we move to all gender multi-stall toilets, and there's obviously resource issues always about what you can do, but let's imagine a park in a country town where the council's only got the resources to build one facility and they decided to build a multi-stall all gender toilet. Is that going to perhaps exclude some women or a significant cohort of women who, irrespective of the reality of dangers and risks and all, sort of accepting what you've said, who just won't use that loo because they don't feel that it's safe or they don't feel that it's culturally appropriate?
Sorry, Mr. Lawrence, can you clarify I'm a little confused. You've said that there is one facility that's all gendered, and so I'm not entirely sure how a woman using that facility imagines she's going to encounter someone else within that facility.
So I'm talking about a multi-stall facility there.
Okay, so now we are talking about a multi-stall facility.
Yeah, because Dr. Gillard moved on, I think, to sort of...
All right,
yeah.
sort of... apart from the extremely good evidence that Dr. Gillard actually presented there, I have concerns that sort of a lot of these arguments realistically are applying sort of socially and politically acceptable band-aids over the underlying issue of men's violence. Sort of addressing men's violence isn't about providing gendered toilets. We know that. So I think the argument, if it was explored deeply, would philosophically just fall apart.
Yeah, so do you think, though, and accepting all of that, and I'm sort of not trying to express an opinion necessarily here, but I'm interested in the question about, is there going to be women who feel excluded from all gender toilets if that's the only option, I suppose is what I'm getting at.
I can only sort of speak to my experience. I have a cisgender wife, and we attend sort of various events and parties together. And I can tell you that sort of events where there are all gender toilets, she actually sort of actively feels safer in those facilities than she does at events which have gendered toilets. That is one person, obviously, sort of, but I think it sort of speaks to the fact that sort of inherently in and of themselves an all gendered toilet has no sort of is no more threatening than sort of two binary gendered toilets, where there's sort of which in a lot of ways reinforces the concept of a gender binary, which we could sort of have discussions around whether or not gender binary actually sort of generates a lot of violence within society.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're really important points, but I suppose what I'm getting at is the diversity of views and perceptions that will exist across the community, and what would be the practical impact in this sort of hypothetical situation, but it does arise out of your submission where you talk about multi-stall, all-gender toilets as kind of best practice. Would they potentially create a situation, maybe in the short or medium term, maybe not forever, but where there is exclusion of certain types of women, for example?
Yeah.
And accepting what you say about your wife, Dr. Toyer, and that's, completely legitimate. I understand that, and I think there'd be many women who have that view. But I suspect there would be women as well who didn't have that view, and I'm interested in how you reconcile that, I suppose.
Yeah, we've definitely addressed that in our submission, where we basically, our first recommendation is to create all gender bathrooms, including single stall and multi-stall.
Yeah.
And then we say a second option, if there's specific locations where you get the public sentiment that they want a bathroom for women, then you can turn the men's multi-stall bathroom into an all-gender bathroom and leave the women's bathroom as is. And that recommendation was based on Sally Goldener made that recommendation in, I think, 2021 around stadiums in Victoria, some stadiums. And that was what that was based on. I will note, though, that studies show that if you do make bathrooms all gender across the board, that radically reduces wait times for women. So there's lots of... Right. And I'm happy to provide those references. But yeah, I think too, the reality is that when we're talking about violence against women, which is incredibly important to talk about, we need to be talking about violence against trans and gender diverse communities broadly as the current system perpetuates it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. I might jump in. I've got a question around the provision of sanitary products and sanitary bins. This is something that's come up earlier in the inquiry in the context of people who experience incontinence, and we've received evidence about things like the Bins for Blokes campaign. I note in some of your written submissions there are comments about the need for sanitary products and sanitary bins in men's toilets, but is this also an issue that we could address, given resourcing constraints for people like local councils, providing a sanitary bin in an all-gender toilet? Is that the preferred way forward?
Certainly, in our opinion, an all-gendered toilet implies all genders, like it's going to have a sanitary bin. Every gender uses sanitary items. I think to imply that one gender only uses sanitary items is on multiple levels sexist, ableist, and sort of and a variety of other exclusive positions. And I do not see how providing a sort of bin, and to be frank, I do not see how providing sanitary bins even in sort of single stall sort of male gendered bathrooms in any way requires any sort of particular effort other than to say this is what we are going to do. These are not difficult items to provide. They're a bin.
And certainly in our submission, our position very clearly is there should be sanitary waste facilities, and we would also argue sanitary products available in all toilets regardless of the gender, male, female, all gender. We just think that makes sense.
Thank you. Pitai, I wanted to ask you as well, in your opening statement you talked about research that you conducted in collaboration with Western Sydney University. Could you speak to that?
Look, I can, and I can subsequently send you the details of it. Included in the research that we've done is that it's when children hit the school system, the primary school system, that suddenly there are all sorts of challenges around toileting. So in the preschool system, it's not an issue. Toilets are not gendered. And suddenly kids get to school and they're expected to fall into the binary norm of girls and boys. That's the case for toilets. My kids' school, it was the case for which basket you put your lunchbox in, which group you line up with, etc. So suddenly this is occurring. And our experience is absolutely that the issue of which toilet can a transgender diverse young person use is a big issue that often requires a lot of negotiation between parents. And, we're just off the back of the beginning of another school year, and there are parents all over the state, having to advocate for their children to be able to get access to an appropriate toilet facility. And the amount of energy that requires from the parents to have to, get in there and have that one of the first things that you end up discussing with your child's school just seems crazy. There should be much clearer guidelines, clearer provision. There should be all gender toilet options in schools for kids. It just would make so much sense for the well-being of our young people, but also the flow-on impact to their families and their parents as well.
Thank you. My next question's for anyone that wants to answer it. We had a fairly detailed discussion in the previous session around signage and communication and what kind of signage is helpful or harmful for people. Have you got views on that?
I don't have a particular view, but what I would ask is that the designers and the people that provide these facilities actually take on board the lived experience and the input from the community. I mean, I think that's the key thing.
I think our view with the example signage we submitted as well is that the signage we sort of believe should more reflect the actual facilities in each bathroom rather than what's in there. A bathroom, if it has if it has cubicles, if it's accessible, if it has urinals and the such, rather than any gender focus, the signage of an all gender bathroom should reflect the facilities contained within the bathroom, because that's the important part, is not so much gendering it, but just knowing what facilities are contained.
I think to the point Ms. Sasha Bailey made this morning, I thought was really great about that difference between all gender and gender neutral, and how potentially people who are agender, that is people who don't identify as having a gender, might feel more included under gender neutral, but we don't mind if it's gender neutral or all gender.
We have nothing to add to the statements already made.
I was wondering, Miss Taylor, did you want to maybe expand on your submission that there should be a Human Rights Act in New South Wales, and maybe talk about what particular rights you think might be relevant to this inquiry, and why you think it'd be a good aid for the people of New South Wales in terms of interpreting laws and making laws dependent on human rights?
Yeah, so Queensland, ACT and Victoria have a Human Rights Act. New South Wales does not. A Human Rights Act would ensure protections of trans people and our children, that they can have equal rights to use a toilet. It's just, there are more and more vigilantes out there who take on some sort of policing role of who they think can go into a toilet. And just to have a Human Rights Act or Charter we know then that our kids are protected, and when they go to school, or a principal or a teacher or whoever it is, because schools aren't consistent themselves, it depends on who's there that day, that a child might be able to use a toilet or not. It would just be so great to know that they're protected by an act, and they're not protected under law that way under a Human Rights Act, that they're not equal. It's just, it's really hard dealing with a school that does not see your child as equal to the other children.
Yeah.
It's awful.
Yeah. There's been some discussion earlier in the inquiry about rights. Not actually sure which instrument they come out of, but a right basically to public toilets coming out of, I think, a right to water and sanitation that's been talked about. But then there's more general rights as well that can be embodied in instruments like equal protection rights that are sort of broader than that, I suppose, and can apply to lots of different situations.
Absolutely, because we've had an issue in New South Wales with our children's right to access medical information when it's needed.
Yep.
And so a Human Rights Act would help in that perspective as well.
Yeah, and I think in the American context, that's been litigated in terms of equal protection, I think, and an idea that certain medical treatments and the right to access them is protected through that clause.
Yeah.
The only thing I would add to that is that, sort of drawing on the experiences of a friend of mine who's a disability advocate, a vast majority of anti-discrimination acts are reactive.
Yep.
They require a complaint to be made. The sort of a Human Rights Act is proactive. It implies that there is that right, and sort of and that it is sort of actually made and sort of enacted and enforced.
Yeah, and it casts an obligation, for example, on government when preparing laws and policies that engage with rights to actually think about human rights and factor them into decision making and justify if they want to depart from them in a public and transparent way, which I think would be of great assistance, frankly, to all of us in a whole range of different ways.
One of our committee members online wanted to ask a question. I'll go to Mrs. McDonald.
Thank you. My question can be to everyone. I was just thinking what changes in toilet design would make public spaces feel not just only safer but more accessible, but that you're supported as well, because from the evidence I've heard, it doesn't appear that, what I take for granted as going to the public toilet is everybody's experience. So I just wondered what could improve so that it would feel safer, more accessible and supported.
I think, again, this is signage is your jam.
I think a big part of it on my end is, again, that sort of idea of signage and openness, just being very blatant and upfront with purposes, why they've gone this way, because I think public education is a huge part of it, and sort of especially in public spaces, if there's sort of that official recognition that, hey, we're doing this for the safety of people, it sort of creates that atmosphere. And accessibility wise, as someone who also does have some movement impairments, it's just also, having them be more open and in the design and more just generally for all use really helps with that sort of idea of feeling a lot safer and able to go to public bathrooms more than it currently is under the current system and design.
I think for myself as a non-binary trans person too, in terms of feeling welcomed in public toilets, it has to do with broader public education, which I know that Ms. Sasha Bailey sort of raised as well, but also looking at, the broader issue of the fact that beyond just that immediate spatial setting, the fact that there's not mandatory LGBTQ+ inclusion training in most workplaces or mandatory trans and gender diverse inclusion training in most workplaces. The Safe Schools program in New South Wales that taught people about LGBTQ+ communities got scrapped in 2016 when the federal government funding stopped. And so that sort of sends a message. For myself, I think a lot of people want to be trans and gender diverse inclusive but don't have the education. That's something the Trans Justice Project said in their one of their guides about how to message around trans inclusion. So for me, it's also that kind of broader structural issue of if kids aren't getting education in schools about LGBTQ+ identities and then you enter the workplace and there's no mandatory requirement for training, you create these sort of settings where there's a lot of social anxiety around trans and gender diverse people. So those sorts of education campaigns and that sort of training for me would make me feel safer in public as well.
I think with particular reference to signage and reinforcing the points made by Plus Network and TJP with their signage recommendations earlier, clear and explicit signage that sort of describes exactly what facilities are there is what we would advocate for. This then enables the individual to decide as to whether or not this is a facility that they feel comfortable using. If they know that it has urinals and they are comfortable with using urinals, then they can use that facility. If that does not make them comfortable, they can choose to use another facility. So with regards to signage, clear and explicit signage, that describes exactly what is there, would be sort of helpful, and sort of obviously consulting, as was mentioned by Petai, consulting people with lived experience on making that signage and language inclusive.
I just wanted to also add that in addition to all of these things, where there is a gender-neutral option for bathrooms, a single use or multi-store, it means that people like my child that's non-binary, they don't have to feel guilt in using a disabled toilet and taking it away potentially from a disabled person. So there are so many multifaceted positives to having all gender bathrooms.
Thank you. That's all we've got time for this morning. Thank you all so much again for sharing your experience and your expertise with us today. And if there are supplementary questions from the committee, the Secretary will be in touch with you about those.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for making time to give evidence today. Can we start with your name and title and taking either the oath or the affirmation?
My name's Lisa Donaldson and I'm here as a melanoma advocate. Is that all you need? Sorry. All right. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Thank you. Would you like to start by making a short opening statement?
Yes. Well, good morning, and thank you so much for having me today. I'm here to propose a simple yet powerful public health initiative, and that's the provision of free sunscreen in public toilets across Australia. Australia has one of the highest rates of skin cancer in the world. Yep. And every year over 2,000 Australians die from skin cancer, and the cost of treating melanoma alone is estimated at over $500 million annually. Despite decades of awareness campaigns, sun protection is still inconsistent, especially for people caught unprepared when outdoors. Every 30 minutes, someone is diagnosed with melanoma. Every 6 hours, somebody dies here in Australia. These are my parents. Both of them have died from melanoma. They did not suntan, but rather Dad spent his life playing sports and Mum was out in nature, always gardening. They both died ahead of their time, and although they both wore hats, the lack of sunscreen application ultimately cost them their lives. Providing free SPF 50+ sunscreen in public toilets is a cost-effective preventative measure that could significantly reduce skin cancer rates. Public toilets are already a trusted location for hygiene and safety measures like soap and hand sanitizer, as well as baby change stations. So sunscreen dispensers would be a logical and easy to implement addition. Why public toilets? Well, there are high traffic areas in parks and beaches and sporting grounds where people already are exposed to the sun. They offer a practical solution for forgotten or inaccessible sunscreen, ensuring everyone, especially children, has the opportunity to protect their skin. Similar initiatives have been trialled in locations around the world, showing that public sunscreen dispensers are both used and valued. How can this work? So dispensers could be funded through public health grants, partnerships with sunscreen brands or local councils. The cost of a dispenser is relatively low and refilling them is minimal compared to the long-term savings in skin cancer treatment. For high-cost medications, those that my mother took, Braftovi and Mektovi, the government's contribution is significant, potentially costing over $13,500 per month per patient. Maintenance could be included in existing cleaning schedules for public amenities, and this initiative, I believe, is a small but high impact investment in public health, aligning with Australia's commitment to skin cancer prevention. And I urge you all to consider this as part of a broader strategy to improve public amenities and to protect Australians from preventable health risks. So thank you for having me here today, and I welcome any questions. I'm neither a dermatologist or a sunscreen manufacturer, but I'll do my best to answer any questions that I can today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I might start just with a couple of questions from myself. You mentioned in your opening statement existing trials in other jurisdictions. Can you talk to us about where this has already been done?
Yes, so I've got a few examples to share with you. I'll start with in the Netherlands. So in 2023, they actually converted all their hand sanitizers into being sunscreen dispensers. And so they got on that really quickly. And it was initially proposed by a dermatologist who thought that this would be a useful use of the hand sanitizer dispensers. And so it was a collaboration between actually health insurance companies and Cancer Council charity. And together they put out 100 sunscreen dispensers in parks and beaches and places like that, along with 120 schools. So it meant that sun protection was readily available. And the sunscreen suppliers reported a huge demand from sporting clubs and schools and councils for the upkeep of these dispensers with the sunscreen in them. So that was in the Netherlands in 2023, which I thought was really cool, a good use and, environmentally sustainable way to make reuse of those hand sanitizer dispensers. In Canada, at a Memorial University, there's two of those in Newfoundland and in Labrador. A university initiative put sunscreen dispensers throughout the campus, and they had a real, culture of proactive skin health awareness amongst students, faculty and staff. But they installed these sunscreen dispensers across the campuses and they were readily used. I'm not quite sure where they're at with that, but that was another example. The one that I feel matches closely to what I am proposing was in Philadelphia in the USA. And so it started in 2017, and they started with 20 free sunscreen dispensers throughout the city in high traffic areas. And so it was a collaborative effort in terms of the funding from the City of Philadelphia, a Melanoma Foundation, and the Philadelphia Phillies, who are a baseball team. And it was so successful that in 2023, they decided to put sunscreen dispensers at the exit of every shopping mall in Philadelphia. So that was a real success story, and that's still ongoing. In Australia, there have been a couple of trials of this. In 2019 in Coffs Harbour, they actually had sunscreen vending machines. Now this is, of course, people would need to pay for the sunscreen and things like that. I couldn't find the outcome of that. It was a 12-month trial. And I think the fact that people would have to pay for sunscreen was probably a bit off-putting to certain people. In Happy Valley Reservoir in South Australia, there was a single sunscreen dispenser put out, and over 3 months' time, there were over 5,000 sprays of this sunscreen dispenser, and their Lions Club supported that. I'm not quite sure if that still exists there, but they monitored it over the 3 months, and over 5,000 sprays of that was administered. And in Brisbane in 2019, there was an installation of free sunscreen stations across Brisbane public pools. And the view was that it was easy to access, and, you know, the application would be easy because it was free and accessible. So those are locations and places that I've, you know, been able to find have implemented this. Where all of those are at individually, I can't tell you today, but I feel like, you know, everything that I've looked into in terms of putting sunscreen dispensers into toilets has been really positive, and I feel like if we could do this here in Australia, starting with beautiful New South Wales, then I think it could have a really positive impact.
Thank you. That was very comprehensive. It looks like you've got a sunscreen dispenser there. Is that something you want to show us?
I do. Look, this is just a sunscreen dispenser that I bought from Officeworks, and I grabbed it from Officeworks because Officeworks is readily available. It's not a big fancy one. It's just a standard sunscreen dispenser. I have lovingly called it a Simo station. So my dad, Jeff Simpson, he was lovingly known as Simo by all his friends, and I made little stickers to say Simo Station, sunscreen is my option, is the acronym for Simo. And, you know, just a really simple dispenser like this is about $40, and it costs about $70 to top up the sunscreen dispenser. So for me, I feel like, you know, it doesn't attract a lot of attention. There are a lot of very fancy sunscreen dispensers that are quite tall, that you put your hands under and it automatically dispenses the sunscreen. And I feel like, although they are beautiful and, they're excellent, I feel like they attract a lot of unwanted attention, and that they might actually encourage children to come over and play with the automatic sunscreen dispensing. I've seen one in a school and it was a mess because kids just like playing with that sunscreen dispensing, mechanism. So something like a really simple sunscreen dispenser like this, I think is fantastic because, it's not terribly expensive. It's not, it doesn't attract too much unwanted attention. And I just thought I'd make a little prop today so that you could see that, and that will hang in our house at home when I get home.
Thank you. Mr. Notes?
Thanks so much for your submission and attending today. It's really interesting.
Thank you.
Is there any other place in the community where sunscreen is given out for free? You talked about pools, some pools.
Yeah.
But is there any other places that...
Yeah, look, schools often have sunscreen dispensers of some description. But as I was saying, with the big fancy ones, kids like to play with anything that's kind of automatic and that kind of thing. So a lot of schools and other locations might just have, what are they called, a bracket with like a sunscreen put in there and it's like locked on. So schools are the one that springs to mind. Yeah. But when I've discussed this with people in my own world, they've said, let's get these into schools. And I feel like the place that I'd like to see them first are places like cricket grounds and football grounds and beaches. This idea really came to mind for me when I was watching my nephew play cricket. And look, I'm someone who wears a huge hat and always has sunscreen with us. But on that particular occasion, I was actually caught off guard because the clouds lifted and the sun was really intense, and like I'm very attuned to sun and how it feels in my skin, but I was just like, oh gosh, we're going to burn here today. Yeah. Anyway, my son needed to go to the toilet and we walked over to the bathrooms and there was a water station to fill up the water bottles. There was hand sanitizers, soaps and all sorts of things like that. And at that point I was just like, gosh, some sunscreen dispenser here would be fantastic right now. And so in my mind, I'm like, if we could roll this out in just, certain locations like ovals and fields where there's no shade and, you're out there and you're scorching, I feel like that would be so beneficial. Yeah. And so I don't think every single toilet in Australia needs one. That would be my dream come true. But, those locations where there is not a whisper of shade and there's just nowhere you can retreat to, I feel like they could be really high priority spots for a sunscreen dispenser. Yeah.
In terms of places where it's been trialled, and I assume the answer to this question is going to be no, but are you aware of any evidence where they've investigated its sort of impact on skin cancer rates or anything like that? It would be quite a difficult task, I imagine.
Yeah, look, I've really tried to find as much evidence as I can around this. I feel like the 2009 investigation in Coffs Harbour would be the best one to look at. Yeah. So the reason that Coffs Harbour put some sunscreen dispensers in play was because the rates of melanoma in their community was higher than anywhere else in Australia. And so they were they were onto that to try and make a difference in their community. I haven't been able to access a report on that 12-month trial, so I don't quite know where it went. The problem being with that one was it was a vending machine and it was whether or not people were willing to pay for sunscreen. I know I would be, but a lot of people would just be like, oh, she'll be right.
I think it would be hard to tease out any impact, I would have thought as well.
Yes.
But something that occurred to me was, I suppose if you roll this out, there's going to be the direct benefit to the people who apply sunscreen. But there's also going to be an awareness-raising exercise, I suppose, about the importance of it.
Yes.
You could have signage, for example, on the dispenser.
Yes. So I imagine that around this would be some signage that, explains how much to put on. Yeah. I put a little pretend QR code on this example because if people had allergies or intolerances, they might be able to use the QR code to have a look at the ingredients in there. And from there, it might direct them to, what melanoma can look like. And so when I think about mum and dad's first melanoma looked like a clear coloured pimple and it was just underneath a necklace he used to wear and he thought it was just the rubbing of the necklace had made a bit of a mark on him. And by the time he actually had that investigated, it was too late. Yeah. He was 57 when he was first diagnosed. It was actually 10 years ago today that Dad died. And so the timing of all this is not lost on me. And when I got the email to say, come on up, I was actually getting a skin check that day myself. Mum we lost 2 years ago and she did have a big kind of ugly mole on her leg. However, it wasn't something that was clearly visible or exposed to by the sun. I guess she didn't really pay much attention to it. She was of that generation where, people didn't really wear sunscreen. So I feel like it's sort of the Gen X and the baby boomers that I'm most concerned about because I feel like I'm a Gen X woman and I feel like, I had terrible exposure to sun as a child, even though I'd wear Mum and Dad would put a T-shirt on us at the beach and we'd put zinc on our faces, but I remember peeling skin off my body from sunburn and on one occasion I had blisters all over my face. So I do worry about, the people who are 40 and above in particular. I'm also concerned with some of the young people who are into tanning at the moment. There's a real trend for tanning and getting a tan line, which is really worrying as well. So, I feel like not only would the sunscreen, being there and being prominent, but, having some signage around that as well might also alert people. Definitely think it's worth a try.
Yeah, so do I. As someone who's regularly turning up to events and forgetting to put on sunscreen, it would be really good to be able to duck into the loo and put on some sunscreen. Yeah,
and I think that's a big point is that sometimes people who try to be best prepared might sometimes be like, oh gosh, we've forgotten it. And to know that I can duck into the bathroom because there's a Simo there, I think that would be brilliant. I've been caught out myself and like I would pay for sunscreen, but I know a lot of people wouldn't. And to have it there that's free and accessible in the same way as hand sanitizer was rolled out, I think would be brilliant.
Has there been any appetite for this from like the Cancer Council or New South Wales Health?
Yes, so I was, this is how I met Amanda actually. I was, I buddied up with the Australian Skin Cancer Foundation, Jay Allen, who is the CEO there, and we contacted lots of MPs to try and like just get the word out about this, and they are very busy getting their skin check trucks out on the road. They're trying to get more of those out on the road, and that's a high priority for them. And so when this opportunity came about, I just thought I'll just jump on this by myself because I know that I can come and I can talk to it. But the Australian Skin Cancer Foundation are very are behind this, and they see it as valuable as me. Their priority at the moment though is getting those free skin check trucks out on the roads, and so I just thought I'll come today, I'll pitch the idea, and hopefully something sparks in you guys to, you know, maybe investigate this or put this forward to other people as well.
Have you got a view on, you know, if we were to do a trial at a New South Wales level, in terms of who's actually responsible for putting them in or for maintaining them and for filling them up? Is this something that you'd see as a partnership with sports clubs or with councils, or have you given much thought to the mechanics?
I have thought about it, and I figured, I mean, the easiest way, in my view, even though I don't know how it all works, is that whoever's topping up the soap dispensers in the public toilets, I would hope would just easily check one of these sunscreen dispensers and top it up as well. I feel like that would probably be the easiest because someone's already in that role, and that's just something that they could, you know, check and make sure that, you know, that was well stocked. But, you know, I've had a lot of interest from, you know, swimming clubs and things like that. I feel like, you know, the opportunity for collaborations with different people. I've thought about places like the Men's Shed in terms of like them being involved and getting them to, you know, keep an eye on them or install them and things like that. Gives them a sense of purpose and something to do and an ownership there as well. I've thought, I mean, I haven't approached them, but I just feel like there are so many people in our community who have been impacted in some way by melanoma, knowing someone, that I feel like people would just be like, yes, I want to be involved. I feel like there are families who would love to, you know, sponsor, you know, a SIMO station and have that in their community. But in terms of like the actual logistics and who's going to top it up, I feel like the council and whoever's doing the soap would do that as well. Yeah. But I feel like the actual cost of it, I feel like there is an opportunity for businesses and sporting clubs to like sponsor one of these. So in Philadelphia, it was, you know, their softball team that helped fund, you know, the implementation of those as well. So, I mean, I'm just throwing ideas out there, but yeah, I feel like the council's topping that up is probably the easiest way to go.
Thank you. I haven't got any more questions. Was there anything else that you really wanted to get across that we haven't asked about?
No, I really thank you for this time, and you know, I've been sitting on this and thinking about this for such a long time now, and yeah, it's meaningful for me for these two here in front of me.
It's amazing what you've done. Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you. And it doesn't have to be called SIMO, but I think sunscreen is my option. Is such a cool name, and yeah. Mum and Dad would be proud today.
I absolutely
Do you mind
agree.
if we take a photo? I wouldn't mind sharing it on my socials.
Yep.
That's all right.
Go for it.
Thank
I've
you
got
so
this
much.
far and now I've got a tear in my eye.
So, yeah. We'll just take a short break until our next witness is at 1:15. To our last but certainly not least witnesses of today. Can I just check we're back on the broadcast? Thank you. Thank you so much for making the time to give evidence today. Can we start with stating your name and position title for the record and taking either the oath or the affirmation? Maybe starting from my left.
So I'll give my name first?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Chris Thorsness. I work out at Castle Towers. I'm currently the CAF rep out there, the Cleaning Alliance Federation. I maintain the loading docks, but I have in the past done a lot of the toilets, and I am in contact with the people who clean the toilets on a fairly regular basis. So I solemnly and sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now I'm about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
Yep, Alex Morales, I'm the lead organizer at United Workers Union. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
Aaron Jones, political coordinator with the United Workers Union. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Would you like to start by making a short opening statement?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Chair and committee members for having us here today. As we just introduced ourselves, my name's Aaron Jones. I'm the political coordinator with the United Workers Union, and I'm joined by my colleague Alex Morales and our member Chris Thorsness, and we're also joined by two of our members, Mitchell Elliott and Anne-Marie Costello, in the crowd. So Mitchell and Anne-Marie work under the whole of government cleaning contract, and as Chris mentioned, he works in a commercial as a commercial cleaner in a shopping centre. So whether our members are cleaning shopping centres or schools or TAFEs, the work that they do is absolutely essential for our communities. Unfortunately, cleaners experience some systemic challenges in their efforts to achieve good, secure and safe jobs. And that comes down to the underpinning nature of the contracting and employment arrangements, and that can result in a continuum of issues from underpayment of wages and superannuation through to, at the worst, conditions that are indicative of modern slavery. So we really appreciate your time here, and we're really interested in talking through some of the ways in which those underpinning challenges affect how public toilets are cleaned and the accessibility and amenities that are so important for the public to access.
Thank you. I might start with a couple of questions for
Please.
myself. I know other committee members will have questions. Look, in your opening statement, you've mentioned that connection between working conditions and the cleanliness of toilets and therefore the experience that the public has. Could you talk us through what those issues are with working conditions?
Yeah, and I'll turn to Chris in a moment about some of the sort of how that looks like on the ground, but sort of just to step back of the sort of the big picture of where those underpinning problems come from. Often cleaning work is performed by contractors that are awarded work under price competitive bids, and that has an effect of pushing the cost down and pushing the labour costs down. So in order to win work, there's an incentive there for companies to bid as low as possible. And then in order to fulfil the obligations of the contract, often those savings will be found by attempting to lower labour costs, whether that means directly breaching the award conditions or constructing subcontracting and sham subcontracting arrangements that enable sort of a network of employers to effectively lower those labour costs. And then what we see, sort of the effect on the ground, is workers in less secure positions, less secure jobs, paid, at best if they're paid the award wage, it's 87 cents above the minimum wage, but at worst paid below the minimum wage, and that affects the sort of both the stability but also the empowerment of people on site to raise issues around their suppliers, their rostering, safe staffing levels, and that's where you see those problems actually sort of come through into the sort of the cleanliness and cleaning of toilets. And I'll sort of turn to Chris on what that actually looks like, cleaning the toilets.
Well, at Castle Towers you have 3 levels. It's a very large shopping centre spread right out, and you'll have one cleaner for the male and one for the female. but there's 8 sets of toilets with all the urinals, and there's cubicles, plus parents' rooms, plus 8 lots of disabled toilets. So when you've got to do your rotations on a regular basis and go right around to all those toilets. And when it's not that busy, it's quite manageable. But when it gets busy, it becomes very difficult to maintain that, because you're going from one to the next, but you're getting calls for, you'd be doing your rotation and you're trying to maintain that, go to the next toilet. But then you get a call about a major spill, a major accident in another toilet. You've got to go backtrack, go back and clean that up because it's urgent. Then you've got to get back onto your schedule and keep moving around. And the logistics of doing that are quite difficult with the size of the building and only having one cleaner for those 8 toilets spread out over a large building. I mean, the previous contractor, we had 2 cleaners per set of toilets. Now it's only 1. And it was a big saving for QIC, but it has compromised the standard. And the QIC being a CAF a member, they're fairly reasonable on their demands. But when it's extremely busy, we can't maintain what they expect. It's very stressful going in with a cleaning trolley into a busy toilet when everyone's trying to use the cubicles, and they want to use them, but you want to clean them, and you have to wait for them, and that can put you behind on your schedule as well. So it's a tough call. It's quite stressful, and the public can be somewhat irate, belligerent, a bit impatient. If they're not clean, they can be outright rude. Not everyone, but most people are reasonable, but some aren't. So it's not an easy job, and that's the reality. And I did it for a while. I'm glad I don't have to do it anymore. So that's the way I see it.
And just to sort of give that some context, so the site, Castle Towers, that Chris works on is a CAF certified building. So CAF is the Cleaning Accountability Framework, which is an organisation that works with property owners and asset managers to ensure that they are taking a more active role in the supply chain compliance within the cleaning on site. So it's an example of a site where we have the ability to sort of to understand what the sort of the scope of the cleaning requirements are, and society has an enterprise bargaining agreement as well. So those real issues that Chris are pointing about is what is present on a site, with perhaps sort of some of the better approaches that there are. And outside of sort of that certification system, often the challenge is lacking the without having enterprise agreements in place, we don't have those structured mechanisms to deal with safe staffing levels and the underpinning requirements for cleaners.
Thank you. In your written submission, and thank you for the effort to prepare that, you specifically talk about the whole of government cleaning contract.
Yes.
We had a fair bit of evidence already to this inquiry about things like the public toilets at train stations and other sort of public buildings.
Yep.
Is this related to the maintenance of train station and other toilets?
So train stations are not under the whole of government contract. So the whole of government contract, so education, so public schools and TAFE is the largest share of that. And then there are thousands of other government sites across the state that are included within that contract. Police stations, ambulance stations, electorate offices, courthouses and government office buildings. But train stations themselves aren't. But certainly so a lot of those buildings are sort of quasi-public spaces that the public can use, and certainly public sector employees and teachers, students. And it goes to the point about the sort of the role of where the funding is and how those standards are set. So we have an ongoing campaign to bring that cleaning work, the whole of government cleaning work, back in-house. That remains a sort of a constructive dialogue with the government about doing that. And we think that would really demonstrate a very strong leadership step in the standards in the sector. Having those cleaners brought back in-house, enabling us to negotiate directly with the government as employer about pay and conditions, about workloads, about the expectations for cleaning bathrooms across all of those spaces would be a really positive move.
Thank you. And last question from me. You already described this issue of contracting and subcontracting legally or illegally for cleaning work. In your views, that also related to the issue of suppliers, and I'm thinking particularly, we've heard lots about toilets where there isn't any soap or isn't any toilet paper or isn't any hand sanitizer, and would the availability of those essential items be improved by directly employing the cleaning staff as well?
Definitely, and it comes down to the pricing incentives throughout the system. So one of the elements of the cleaning accountability framework is ensuring that procuring entities are using a pricing schedule that sets out all of the scope of cleaning work and the minimum labour standards that any contractor would need to meet, and included in that can be all the other suppliers that a cleaning contractor is there, so that you can ensure that when you're awarding the work that there is minimum adequate cost that contractors are accounting for in their bids. Without that, you have contractors that bid low to get the work and then try and find the savings everywhere else in the contract. And I think Alex probably has some good examples.
Yeah, look, in effect, like a lot of it comes down to budgeting, and when the budgeting gets left to area managers and site supervisors that don't necessarily have control of the budget, sometimes they run out of stuff before the month it's over. But I think the fact is that they are saving stuff. I've heard a lot of stories about cleaners buying their own chemicals because they run out of chemicals, or getting only one pair of gloves per shift, or things like that, because there just isn't enough, or the manager doesn't get around to all the schools to deliver those. So it's about time management, it's about managing your budget, but it's also about not having enough money in the budget in the first place to buy everything. So they save on, you don't get as good a material. I was a cleaner, you kept getting these bags that would rip open, and you had to pick them up and then use another bag, and then they hand you, they count the bags that you are going to use. So they're really trying to save as much as possible, because the margins are really thin in cleaning, and that affects toilet cleaning as much as it does any other area, especially with chemicals and in toilet cleaning. They can't run out of toilet paper, because then they'll get a complaint from the client, or the school or the shopping centre. So they keep those things stocked up most of the time. Usually when you run out of toilet paper in a public toilet, which I've cleaned as well, is usually because you can't get in there, or because there's just not enough time to go around everywhere and replace all the filling all the stuff, and you're under pressure to do other toilets as well. But I guess in Chris's shopping centre, they have a male and a female toilet cleaner, because that's part of the EVA. But in other places, you only have a male or a female, and you have to either lock the toilet or put a barrier, which no one tends to respect. So it's difficult to get into the opposite sex kind of toilet and refill some stuff. So sometimes things run out. Soap, it depends, everything. Some people take the toilet paper too if you leave replacements there. So this is the reason why toilet paper and things that I guess the public will complain about run out. But things like materials like gloves or PPE or things like that run out, because that's where they're trying to save. the chemicals, the things that the public don't see. The masks are very, they're used as much more now than before COVID. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just one follow-up question, because you've talked about the logistical challenge that the gendered bathrooms create with access for cleaning staff. We've had a very detailed discussion earlier today about the potential benefits of sort of universal design, all gender cubicles, also a single cubicle that's got the wash basin inside it rather than sort of a traditional toilet block that's got multiple stalls. Would that kind of design also be easier to clean?
It is a good idea. A lot of people use the disabled toilet because it's lockable, and they're the only ones in there. And as long as they remember to lock it, it's kind of a safe space for them. They also use that because it's usually less people use it, so it's cleaner. There's always it's always stocked. So a lot of people go in there and use that. It is, I guess, if you give enough time for the job to be done, it's much more difficult to open every door and lock every door and do that kind of work. But it's only it takes a little bit more time, and if you give the cleaners a little bit more time, it would be a better system. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just sort of add to that point that it comes down to the importance of how the scope of work is being costed, and if you are sort of creating a different structure of bathrooms, that you're accounting for that time difference. And I think that's why it's important, the clause in the enterprise agreement that Alex mentioned that sort of establishes that the default is a male identifying cleaner cleaning the male bathroom and a female identifying cleaner cleaning the female bathroom, and when that's not available, that they are able to cordon off the toilets, and it also sets out the supplies and the barriers that cleaners have to be supplied with in order to do that. And having that set in the enterprise agreement sort of feeds back through the sort of the pricing and time allocation, that if you know that is the available cleaners on your roster, you have to account for that time. So I think having more gender neutral bathrooms would just be sort of in the same way that you just have to account for that time in your rostering and staffing.
Thank you. Mr. Diana?
Thanks. I might start by just placing on the record that I used to work with Aaron, so just for transparency purposes, but thank you all for your attendance today. I wanted to come back to something that Mr. Thorsness had said in his initial comments around having 2 cleaners, but previously you had 4.
Yep.
So I'm assuming that then affects the speed with which you can get through the cleaning in the facilities.
Well, definitely.
Yeah.
There's double the workload.
Double the workload.
We lost a lot of man hours when the previous contract was cancelled, and the new Glad Cleaning is the new contractor. They took over the contract. They've managed fairly well given the less hours. They've tightened up and made it more efficient. But there's gaps there. When it's flat out, the whole floor, be it on the floor, people maintain the floor in the bins, the spills and slip hazards and what have you, or the toilets, it's very difficult to maintain it properly.
And does the contract specify how frequently the toilet needs to be cleaned?
Well, they have a schedule, and they're supposed to do a certain number of rotations a day.
Right.
I believe it's 4 rotations, but that's 4 rotations of 8 lots of toilets.
Did that schedule change with the reduction in staff, or do they just keep it at the same schedule with fewer staff?
Prior to that, yeah, it was higher. They had it like 6. So the previous cleaners, when there were 2 cleaners per set of toilets, they had a lot easier job. It just got a lot tougher.
Yeah. So you're intensifying the work for the cleaners, but also reducing the number of rotations.
That's right.
Ultimately, the general public are also...
Exactly, what do you expect?
It's a consequence for them.
And that same issue with toilet rolls, we've got plenty of toilet rolls in storage. It's a matter of getting them out there, getting into the toilet cubicles. And if it's too busy, you can't do that with only 1 cleaner. And of course, especially with ladies, but even men, if they run out of toilet rolls, they ring centre management or security, and they're pretty angry. And then we get the call, and then you've got to backtrack and fill out the toilet rolls. But then while you're down at the other toilet, you're getting calls from, when it's really busy, all the problems all come at once in a shopping centre. The spills all seem to come in a similar time frame, mostly. You get all the accidents, you get the ambulance calls when people are slipping over and collapsing.
Is there allowance in the contract for those kind of unexpected events, like the spills and the kind of, the additional stuff that needs to be done, just, that you can't necessarily predict how frequently it will occur? But that obviously eats into the time that's available for cleaners to do the normal rotations.
It's not a formal allowance. If you've got to do every 20 minutes a rotation of your area, if you're doing the floor, for instance, if you get a major spill, and it takes a lot of time to clean it up, they realise you couldn't get that rotation done. But you've got to get a certain KPI, number of rotations on the floor. Likewise with the toilets. We're lucky QIC are CAF certified, and I believe they try to follow the rules. So they're fairly realistic when it's peak periods, like on a Saturday or Christmas. They do sort of, but see, I'm saying we're quite fortunate. Most buildings are not CAF certified. They don't maintain these standards. They don't make these allowances. So we're one of the fortunate few who have most of the time it's fairly reasonable, but in the peak periods, you just can't get the job done, and it is stressful for the cleaners.
Can I ask this may be a general question about, in those type of contracts, how do they determine how many rotations are appropriate?
The thing with cleaning in general, in terms of how they determine how much a cleaner can clean in a certain amount of time, there's no measure, there's no standard. It's mostly down to, they like to use square meterage sometimes. That doesn't work because, specifically in toilets, they are very small area but very concentrated work, very, intensive work, and there's a lot of detail in toilets. So square meterage doesn't work in toilet. So there is no, universal way of working out. And usually when you're talking about rotations, they take, they don't take the busiest time. They take the least busiest time to calculate. So that brings the rotation time down, and that it's hard to keep up the rotation if you don't have anything and the rotation is just walking around. You probably could do it, but when you actually have things to actually spills or things that happen that are not accounted for in the time, then you do fall behind. And in other shopping centres, that can bring a warning, or it can bring you're not keeping up with rotation. And the reason shopping centres that are a bit different is that the rotations are part of the liability insurance, because if someone spills and you show, but we were doing our rotations, then of course you're not liable, or not as liable, I guess. But if you're not keeping up with your rotations, then there's problems there.
So there's no public standard or Australian standard in terms of how frequently a toilet should be cleaned based on how frequently it's used. So
No.
Presumably the toilets at a stadium get a lot of use over a short period of time, intensively, hundreds of people using them. Presumably they need a higher cleaning frequency than perhaps toilets in, a courthouse where maybe someone's, using it once every 15 minutes or so.
Yeah, there is no standard. Some companies do recognise, for example, that Thursday night is busier because it's shopping night, and, they put more people on. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a measure, or a standard measure of how many people you need to put on. Usually, they're under calculate the amount of workers that you need, and that's what happens. There isn't really a measure you can point to. Like I said. The award sometimes calculates a building in terms of a cleanable area, and says, okay, a building this size has to have, at least 4 hours minimum start, right? But apart from that, there is no real measure, and yeah.
Right. And is that something that the union would support being put in place, some kind of standard in terms of assessing or so that those kind of contracts can take into account a sort of publicly established cleaning standard for toilets?
I think one of the approaches that CAF has is having a sort of a square meterage productivity rate, and also requiring the sort of the scoping out of the number of toilets, the number of urinals, the number of disabled toilets, so that you can, combine both the client expectations around the rotations and the work that needs to be done. So I think if there was a sort of a standardised frequency of cleaning that took into account the different venue and use types, then I think the approach would be to sort of further ingrain that in the contracting requirements that are tendered out.
Right. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to also just ask about the work health and safety aspect of the work. Are there particular kind of hazards or that the cleaners encounter that whether they're from members of the public or clients who might get irritable, or like just dealing with chemicals? What kind of work health and
I think
safety
you can
hazards
sort
are
of
there for cleaners?
broadly group it into 3 categories. So you have sort of like physical hazards, so trips and falls from wet floors and any rubbish or obstructions in bathrooms, as well as overuse injuries that come from cleaning repetitively. And then you have your exposure risks, so to both cleaning chemicals in confined spaces, as well as biological matter and human feces and fluid in bathrooms. And then you have your sort of interactions with the public, that can range from sort of just aggravated or aggressive or disrespectful people in a bathroom, through to sort of accounting people in quite acute situations, whether that's affected by drugs and alcohol, or having some other crisis.
Okay.
Thank you. Look, we've only got 1 minute left. Is there anything in particular you wanted to put on the record that we haven't asked about?
Yeah, I think it's sort of our point about the consistency of achieving an employment environment in which people are secure. And a lot of these individual issues that we're talking through of health and safety and rostering are able to be dealt with when people have secure jobs, and when you have a contracting and employment arrangement that supports that, where people are empowered to raise health and safety issues, where you can form effective work health and safety committees that people trust will be able to deal with those issues, and people have that longevity on site to deal with those problems. So we think there is a role for the state government through its employment practices, through its contracting where that remains, and also when it's a tenant, so looking to sort of add CAF certification as a requirement when the government is the tenant but not directly contracting for cleaning. So it really will raise the standards across the sector. I think Chris's worksite is a good one to point to, where the agreement has minimum rates of pay 6% above the award, and when you have the owner, sort of that cost is factored into how it contracts and pays, and that reflects the standard that we've called for in public contracting to ensure that you have above award payments when the government is contracting that work.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the time you've taken to give evidence today, and for your written submission, and absolutely for us to be able to achieve the improvement in public toilet quality that the public is asking us for. We need to be able to support the people who do that really important work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.